Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. I'm Masoumeh Farhad, Chief Curator and the Ibrahimi Family Curator for Persian, Arab, and Turkish art at the Freer Gallery of Art and the Arthur M. Sackler Gallery, which together form the Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Art. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to today's program honoring Dr. Esin Atıl, scholar, curator, author, mentor, and much, much more. Of course, I wish we could have all gathered in person at the Freer and the Sackler, but I hope that the digital format will at least allow some of you who otherwise would not be able to come to Washington to join us virtually. Firstly, I would like to thank our esteemed speakers who are participating from Turkey, the UK, and the United States. And I'm particularly pleased to welcome Taşkın Atıl and Lale Berk to the webinar today. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge my colleagues at the Freer and the Sackler for their tireless work in getting us ready for this webinar today. It really does take a village. And I would like to thank Sana Mirza, Lizzie Stein, Karen Nolan, and Andy Finch. As this gathering is devoted to celebrating Esin Atıl's career and accomplishment, I will keep my introductory remarks brief. When speaking about Esin Atıl, many descriptive terms come to mind. For me, the one that keeps popping up is trailblazer. As you will hear today, Dr. Atıl was not only an impressive scholar, a prolific author, and an imaginative curator, but she also succeeded in introducing the arts of the Islamic world and the Freer collection, not only to aspiring scholars and students, but also to the general public. And while public engagement has become a norm for us today, it was not in the 70s. And Esin was really remarkable in being able to really speak to a much broader public than had been done ever before. Esin Atıl completed her first BA degree in Istanbul in 1956 and received a second BA from the Western College of Women in Ohio in 1958. She then went to Michigan to get her MA degree, and a few years later returned to work on her PhD under the supervision of Oleg Grabar. I remember fondly how Esin insisted that she was Oleg's first PhD student, even if Oleg remembered it differently. In 1970, Dr. Atıl was appointed curator of Islamic and ancient Near Eastern art at the Freer, replacing Richard Ettinghausen, and she held that position until 1985. During her tenure, she published on all aspects of the Freer's collection of Islamic art. And many of her publications, such as Arts of the Arab World or Islamic Metalwork, are still standard references in the field today. Atıl's exhibitions have been equally groundbreaking, and highlights include Ceramics from the World of Islam in 1973, the first and I believe only exhibition devoted to this medium, Art of the Arab World, and then the 1981 Renaissance of Islam, Art of the Mamluks, a highly successful international loan exhibition that was held at the Natural History Museum because the Freer did not host loan exhibitions. These innovative exhibitions laid the groundwork for her 1987 blockbuster, The Age of Suleiman the Magnificent, which remains a landmark in the historiography of the arts of the Islamic world. In the context of the Suleiman exhibition, I would also like to mention the recent passing of another trailblazer, another outstanding Turkish scholar, Filiz Çağman, director of the Topkapi Museum. A close friend and colleague of Esin Atıl's, Dr. Çağman played a critical role in Turkey and at the Topkapi to make the Age of Suleiman happen. And finally, Esin Atıl was a woman of great humor. And many of you I know have your own Esin stories. I never forget her disbelief when she realized I did not know how to sew a button. As she was a great designer and made her own stylish clothes, she immediately got to work and remedied my shortcoming. Let us now return to the program. It is my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Walter Denny, a distinguished professor of art history at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He specializes in the art of the Islamic world. From 2007 to 2017, Professor Denny served as senior consultant in the Department of Islamic Art at the Metropolitan Museum. His research interests include architecture, design, painting, carpets, silk textiles, ceramics, especially of the Ottoman sphere. Professor Denny has served as consultant for dozens of museums around the world, and his seminars and museum studies has prepared many of his students for art museum careers. Thank you, and Walter, the floor is yours.
It's a great honor and pleasure to be here and to greet people from all over the world, 210 of them right now. A good audience for a very important webinar about a very wonderful person. My talk is more personal perhaps than some of the others, and I'm going to show a very small number of pictures compared to the other speakers because I thought that I would, because I'm going first, I would deal with things from a more personal, in a more personal way, largely due to the fact that Esin and I got our PhDs at the very same time. She was, in a way, the last of Oleg's students to be awarded a PhD from Michigan, and I was, in a way, the first of Oleg Grabar's students to be awarded a PhD from Harvard University, both around the year 1970. We met as graduate students in the late 60s, and then from that moment on became instantly very close friends. And we have a long history, therefore, of professional collaboration and personal friendship. I'd like to start by asking the question, what was it like back in 1970? It seems, well, it is a long time ago, 51 years ago. What was it like in 1970 starting out in this field? Well, in those days, it was in some ways a lot easier than it has been subsequently. There were only two of us on the job market, and there were two jobs, one at the Freer and one at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And it's quite interesting that both of us basically kept career-long, spent our entire careers in one shape, in one place, rather. There were only two major sources of PhDs in the Islamic field back in those days, Richard Eddinghausen and Oleg Grabar, and Eddinghausen was actually just getting firmly established at the Institute of Fine Arts in New York. There were limited resources for teaching and research. I can remember coming to the University of Massachusetts in an era when we taught with slides, and the only slides of Islamic art that I had to teach with were my own that I had taken in museums, and I'm embarrassed to say a large number of them out of books, and not out of very good books either. There were limited research opportunities and museum access and archives access, especially the Republic of Turkey. Things had not opened up yet, and it was rather difficult to find good collections of books and archives in the United States. In this interesting situation, Esin was more fortunate than I in that Richard Eddinghausen had established a great resource center in Washington at the Freer. But one of the ways in which our generation, Esin and I and others of our generation, began to bond together was through the international conferences, especially the International Conference of Turkish Art, which was just getting off the blocks back in those days. I show you here a picture of Esin and the late Kemalci at I believe the Yakub Hasan Pasha Mosque in Pécs in Hungary back in the 70s. It was there at these conferences that we got to know our friends, and that I made the acquaintance of the Esin and I had known the two other women who, with Esin, became the triumvirate of my own closest friends and mentors in the field, Nurhan Atasoy, who was unable to join us today from Istanbul, and also, of course, the late Filiz Çağman, my three ablas, or big sisters. It was at this time, and largely due to the conferences and due to the opening up in Turkey of resources, that the internationalization of Turkish art itself began, and accessibility to collections and to archives in Turkey started. Now, there's another interesting thing, of course, and that is the gender issue. Esin was a pioneer in many ways in the field, but she was also a PhD out in a man's world of museums back at a time when women were still very relatively rare entities in the academic field. When I was a graduate student, indeed, as I recall, Harvard University had only one tenured female faculty member, and that was the holder of the Radcliffe Professorship, which was restricted to females at Harvard. So there have been dramatically changing attitudes toward women in the field since we both began our work. Nevertheless, I have to say that Esin shared this wonderful story with me that she had just taken a group of very exalted spouses, of very exalted husbands, diplomats, Turkish diplomats, and others through the Freer Gallery, and she said that one of the women had said, "Now tell me, dear, how did you come to have this wonderful hobby of yours?" It was not easy, I think, back in those days for people to realize that Esin was a total professional and that she had brought with her to the Freer a very high level of training. Now, it's interesting when Esin related this story to me with her typical good humor, and by the way, with her remarkable voice. I want to insert one thing right here. We're going to be looking at a lot of pictures today, but I want all of us to think for a moment about Esin's voice. Who ever had a voice like that? Where have we ever heard anybody with a voice like that? I can hear it in my sleep and my dreams. The most amazing voice, tempered with not only sophistication, but perhaps with a little bit of tobacco smoke drawn through a 8-inch long cigarette holder. An amazing voice. But when she related this story to me with such good humor, I had to reflect it, as I have many times since, that together with that, there must have been a certain sting to this rather ludicrous comment. The fact is that, like all women in the field in those days, she was basically a pioneer, and she was facing all kinds of odds that fortunately women have less and less had to encounter since that time. Now, I would say that that is my sort of first anecdote. I do have two stories. We were asked to tell stories, and I must tell you that I picked two of them out of the countless stories that we all have about Esin. Edwin Benny III, who had started to collect Turkish art back in the late 60s, had by the early 70s created a collection of Ottoman Turkish art, a private collection, unique in the world, and in 1973 was invited by Richard Eddinghausen to show his collection at an exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Republic of Turkey. 1973, 50th anniversary of the Republic of Turkey, and we're coming up on the 100th very shortly. Well, this was the first time that Ed had ever met Esin. Now, the picture I'm showing you here is from later, from San Diego. But going back to the Met in 1973, Esin had showed up at the Metropolitan at the opening in an extraordinary black dress with an extraordinarily amazing black feather boa, and of course her trademark rather long cigarette holder. Ed, who was a very sophisticated fellow, was totally bowled over by Esin. He could not, he was raving. I've never heard anything like that from Ed. At any rate, Ed said, "Did you see what I saw?" Well, of course, we all saw what he saw. It was Esin. And I still remember that very fondly. The two of them went on to become very good friends. And here we are, the three of us in San Diego at one of his larger shows that occurred by the 80s. The second anecdote I have here, if Tashkin will please forgive me for this, is the story of the Phantom Tashkin. Like many of us back in those days, we pursued our travels to museums around the world to do our photography and our research. We went to our congresses, not with our spouses, but by ourselves. And of course, Esin was constantly talking about Tashkin, but we had this sort of joke, first between Esin and me, and then rather widely shared, that actually neither of our spouses existed, that they were both fantasies we had put forward so that we could go and carry on at international conferences. And this joke became with Esin especially a bigger and bigger one, until finally we had a conference in Washington, D.C., and Esin announced to me and to her friends that we were going to go over to her house for a party after the conference, and that she was going to make sure, she said that she was going to make sure that we all knew about Tashkin, even if she had to go out and rent an entire closet full of men's clothes and hire an actor to be her husband. So we all met, and we were sitting in Esin's living room, and Tashkin was there for a while, although he left about as in his usual phantom way, a very short time later to go out, I think, and play bridge with his friends. But at any rate, the Tashkin came in, and Esin said, "This is the actor I hired to be my husband," and we all laughed. And then he kissed her, and then before leaving, he turned around to her and he said, "Lady, that kiss will be another $5 on my fee." And we all, of course, exploded in laughter, and he went out the door. Well, at any rate, of course, Esin and Tashkin, a marvelous couple, very devoted to each other. But this story is one of the lovely stories from our earlier times. Now, I want to talk very briefly about Esin's career. Everybody else is going to talk about it, but I just think that everybody here should think you're not as old as I am, most of you, although there are a few of us who are contemporaries. What was it like back in those days? Well, I'm showing you something here, a catalog, if you can call it that, on the left-hand side, for an exhibition that was held at the Topkapi Palace in 1958. Now, I saw that show in 1958, and I was 16 years old, living in Istanbul, and a student at Robert Academy, part of Robert College. And Esin was, in those days, an undergraduate at ACG, American College for Girls, on another hilltop a few miles away in Arnavutköy, and we both saw that exhibition back in those days, never really imagining that one day Suleiman the Magnificent would end up becoming an important part of both of our lives, especially of Esin's. The catalog that you see on the right-hand side was reproduced from a mimeograph and from a typewritten script, a rather badly typewritten script with a few rather miserable black and white photographs. It's about 8 pages, or maybe it's even 12 pages in length, and the format is tiny. Think about what happened between that time, 1958, and the production of Suleiman the Magnificent with its associated film, narrated by none other than the wizard Gandalf the Grey, Ian McKellen, just a world of difference. There was almost nothing back in those days, and then we moved to these huge leaps forward in knowledge, accessibility, and of course, all the things that happened with the legacy from the Suleiman show. And, I lived through all of this, Esin lived through all of this, and of course, Esin especially was the cause of this immense change we see here. Another good example here, when I started teaching and I wanted to show, and I wanted to assign a book to my students about Turkish miniature painting, what was there in 1970? There was Meredith Owen's tiny little brochure from the British Museum with their very limited collection of Turkish paintings, almost nothing else. And then, of course, the floodgates opened, and we have this amazing array of materials available to us today. It's almost overwhelming. But think back to a time how hard it was to teach, how hard it was to do scholarship, when there were so few sources available to all of us in the field. We were literally all of us making our own way. I want to to acknowledge here the Esin's role also in the non-Ottoman era, the non-Ottoman area of scholarship. And again, two books here to, I started looking for my Turkish art catalog from the Freer, and it's a tiny little book, and I spent hours and hours looking for it and couldn't find it. So this photograph I managed to find online on the left-hand side. But here again, we have an amazing sort of reach of things between the very, very earliest work that she did and the magnificent scale and size of the Abrams book. In the non-Ottoman area, her exhibitions also covered a huge range. Now, Masume has mentioned one very important thing here. One of the reasons the humanities are doing so badly in the United States and over the world today is that people in the field have, not all of us, but entirely too many of us, have started talking to each other and not to the general public. The fact is that Esin's work was not only groundbreaking, but also accessible. It was literate, intelligently, and beautifully written. It communicated well. And in what she was doing at the Freer and what I tried to do on my side, in our generation, in public higher education, pursued a common goal, and that is making the art of the entire Islamic world and the Ottoman world in particular accessible to the widest number of people so that we could share our own enjoyment and passion with others. Now, what do I see when I look at Esin's legacy over the years, both in the Ottoman field and in the wider area of Islamic art? I see her role within the cumulative results of a cooperative scholarly effort over many decades. Esin was a great team player. Again and again, she introduced me to other colleagues, especially in Turkey, who have since become good friends and an important part of my life. I get from looking at Esin's career a profound sense of the debt we all owe to our colleagues, both contemporary and those pioneers from earlier times, going back indeed into the 1930s, the individuals who lonely working in the wilderness were the very, very first pioneers, the clearers of the forest, as it were, for Islamic art. I appreciate the profound importance of museums and museum exhibitions in maintaining the public role of the humanities in our democratic society in the United States, a role that becomes increasingly endangered as scholars talk to each other rather than talking to the wider public. And from a personal perspective, I look at Esin's legacy with a profound sense both of humility and, of course, of gratitude. Finally, I remember our long friendship with love and affection, with special gratitude for my friendship with Esin's nearby sister and my Five College colleague, Lale Burke, and her family and her husband, John. And I treasure both Esin's colleagueship and her friendship as essential elements within myself, that is, of the person that I have become as a result of a half a century of having had Esin as an integral and important part of my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. I think I could not hope for or we could not hope for a better introduction to a remarkable woman, both her personal warmth and generosity, as well as her remarkable career. So thank you very much for framing today's conversation. It is my pleasure now to introduce Professor Günsel Render, probably who has known Esin longer than anyone else. Professor Render is professor in the Archaeology and History of Art Department at Koç University in Istanbul. She taught at the Hacettepe University in Ankara and chaired the Department of History of Art for many years in Ankara. She's also served as advisor to the Turkish Ministry of Culture. Professor Render has participated in many international projects, exhibitions, and conferences, and has lectured all over the world. She specializes in Ottoman painting and the interactions of Europe and the Ottoman art, and has trained a cohort of students who have continued her remarkable work. Professor Render, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Masume. This is Now, actually hearing Walter's talk, I can't say, is it his talk or my talk, which will be more personal, because really Esin was my close school friend and colleague at the same time. And of course, it's a great pleasure and joy to talk about Esin. And because we studied at the American College for Girls in Istanbul, which was a junior college. We shared our classes, our rooms, and all the social activities. I will show you some samples. And I think, I wanted to show this picture, which is our graduation picture from the American College. And I think if we have a quick look at this, it shows you, if you can read it, you can go throughly. I don't want to read it. If you want to, I can read it word by word, but there are also some Turkish sections to it. And says, she was practical, but often too original, a child who can make extremely mature decisions at times, much to her friend's surprise. This idealist had a gift for getting into trouble, but getting out of it just easily. And then I will go on. She always concentrated on something. She wanted to hear others' opinions and questions and managed to answer them correctly. And she certainly liked music, drama, and you will see it now. I can even show you some pictures. But look, her likes are Steinbeck, Beethoven, fashion, listening to music in the dark, reading poetry out loud. Now, I just want to show you a few images from our school days. As I said, she was interested in all arts, music and literature and drama. Look, she was the president of the Dramatic Association. Right here, you can see it. And, And you see her with our other friends. And we had all these associations, which we formed groups in school. And we had fun. This was a boarding school. So we spent so much time together. And I introduced some funny pictures because she liked having fun. And we even organized mask balls, And then, of course, these are our images. So getting ready for our graduation party. And again, I'll move on. Esin with friends, with teachers. This is a teacher we had, and this is the president of the American College then. What I want to say about this period is that this is our graduation ceremony. Actually, our last names were started with A. Hers was Aka, and mine was Alpsoy. So we sat side by side in all our classes. And I also have to say that we enjoyed our art history course very much, and also our history of music course. We used to gather with the teachers. As I said, this was a boarding school, and discuss music and art. And so we continued our studies in the States, and me studying art history at Barnard College and Washington University, and she being at the University of Michigan, and of course, Grabar, as Walter has just mentioned. And we were able to meet a few times when we were married. When we met, when we studied. But Esin married Taşkın, and I married Yavuz Renda. And it's interesting because our friendship, school friendship, really continued as family friendship, as our husbands also came to know each other very well. And now I would like to say a few words about Esin as a colleague. Of course, we will be mentioning the same works, I'm sure, as Walter has started, all of us. And I just want to say a few words about the series of exhibitions, but also the impact of all these exhibitions, also in the Turkish art historical world. Now, of course, continuing her career after the University of Michigan as curator at the Freer Gallery, curator of Islamic art in the Freer Gallery. And of course, through the years, she has also contributed as curator and research associate to other museums, galleries, and she organized a series of exhibitions, and she was on the advisory councils of several museums in the States and abroad. And even after her retirement, she undertook consulting work on exhibition planning and museum management in several countries, in several Islamic countries, of course, Kuwait, Jordan, Oman, Sharjah, Malaysia, etc. But I want to really mention this, that I discovered her main goal was to define the different artistic aspects in the Islamic world, organizing exhibitions of artworks from the different countries in the Islamic world would also define interactions. And it certainly did. And I'm sure other colleagues will also speak about this. Of course, she started in 1971 with the 2000 Years of Persian Art. Then in 1973, Turkish art, as Walter has also shown, that it was not a very large exhibition, but a very significant one, because that through the years also ended in this book on Turkish art that she edited, you see on the left. And although she organized exhibitions and conferences of Islamic art of different geographies, what I really discover in her career is that she wanted to define interactions in the Islamic world. And of course, at that moment, as Walter said, research was so limited. And through her exhibitions, in 70s, 80s, art of the Arab world and Renaissance of Islam, the art of Mamluks and Islamic art and patronage, as you see from, well, it was a traveling loan exhibition in Kuwait, and smaller exhibitions of certain manuscripts, and really not cataloging artworks, but writing books about them, especially her work on single manuscript, as we always shared our research and illustrated manuscripts with her. But of course, this went on through the years, and I think all these books published on the occasion of these exhibitions, displaying the artworks in detail, really became the main sources for researchers all over the world, even in Turkey. And of course, as a Turkish art historian, I would like to mention how significant her research has been for us, for academic work and museum studies, starting with her first project in Turkish art that I put on the screen. And of course, that the book published later on Turkish art had this very significant introduction by Oleg Grabar, and the book covered art and architecture from the 12th to the 18th century. And it became a main source book in English for all, other scholars all over the world who wanted to do research. And now I would like to speak a bit more about the Süleyman exhibition, which, as Walter said, was certainly a landmark. And it was the highlight of her profession, of her profession as a curator and initiator of a series of international loan exhibitions. Of course, that's a very important point. And in 1980-81, I spent my sabbatical year in Washington with a Fulbright grant for research at the Smithsonian Institution and the Walters Art Gallery. This had brought us together as classmates, colleagues, and families again. And during that year, we did some joint research at various collections and museums in the Near East, especially, in the part of the United States, and we reached some unpublished material, especially in the Walters Art Gallery, and we shared our research on illustrated manuscripts, and of course, we joined conferences and lectures while there. And when I was in Washington, she was so keen on organizing a loan exhibition of the age of Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent, because she thought that covering the artistic production during this long reign of Süleyman, which of course was really the artistic production in those years was so great in all different arts. But we were trying to discuss how to realize that, because the Turkish government at that time was reluctant in giving permission for museum collections to travel abroad. And after my return to Ankara in 1981, she came to Turkey several times. Of course, she worked especially in Istanbul with Filiz and Zeren, and then we met many, many times. Actually, that was the time when there was also the Anatolian exhibition, civilization exhibition being planned. And I tried in that period to assist her project in the Ministry of Culture as I was, in their committees. And so it was realized, and I was so happy this project of Esin, which was really her ideal as a museum curator working on Islamic art, but also Ottoman art and illustrated manuscripts, and especially, this particular period, which is so significant, really. And then, of course, we all know the exhibition was held in 1987 in the National Gallery of Art, and where she was the curator. But then the exhibition traveled to so many other cities and countries. It was really incredible. Of course, not always with the same content, but it was in Chicago, of course, in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and then it traveled. Of course, it contained all arts, including carpets, textiles, ceramics, metalwork, illustrated manuscripts. And of course, I believe that this exhibition, traveling all over the world, including Australia, certainly brought, or I can say led to a new reading of Ottoman Turkish artistic production within the Islamic world. And of course, the series of these Süleyman exhibitions that you see here on the screen, and even you have here, Esin wrote also introduction of this book on Süleyman the Magnificent's poems. And so it was really a series of exhibitions, series of publications, and certainly, after all these exhibitions, the Turkish government presented her a grand award of culture and arts, and it was given to her by the president of Turkey. Of course, she has many other awards through the years. But then, after the exhibitions, the Süleyman exhibition series, and we continued, of course, our friendship as family friends and colleagues all through the years. And of course, we met in several international meetings, International Congress of Turkish Art, and even in this, as you can see, Congress of Islamic Arts and Crafts in Isfahan, and with other colleagues. And I just want to show you this picture we have in the International Congress of Turkish Art in Budapest, and with all the colleagues. I'm sure you know most of them. And but of course, this is the very personal, relations I've had with her as a close friend and a colleague. I think I want to end by saying a few words about her publications, and the series of these exhibitions on Islamic art resulted, of course, in all these exhibition catalogs, which are always the initial sources for research. And all these exhibition catalogs, and also resulting in individual single books about, for example, individual Ottoman artists, that all these publications were really inspiration for later research in Ottoman Turkish art. And of course, there's so many of her articles. She even wrote articles in very popular Turkish journals. And of course, she was, probably know, on the other editorial board of several journals. And I really believe that all her work, her exhibitions, catalogs, books, articles, did bring a new reading of Turkish art within the Islamic world, inspiring further research. And so through the years, we met in several countries and in various congresses. As you can see, we always shared our research and personal friendship as a family. And the last time we had dinner at my house in Istanbul, because I had moved to Istanbul after Hacettepe, and she even said, it would be nice to have a flat here so that we can stay a bit longer, maybe, when we come to Istanbul, because we would meet friends and colleagues here, and also many school friends. Anyway, I have to end my personal talk. It's a very sad day for us today, but I would like to say that it was really a great pleasure for me to have known Esin as a classmate and colleague, and I will also say family friends, all those years in our lives. And I wish it would have lasted longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Günsel, for that illuminating and very personal perspective. I think it was very important for all of us to hear more about Esin's contributions and especially in how it's affected scholarship not only in the West but also in Turkey.
Yes, I wanted to point to that we still use all those as sources, and
absolutely.
And so translated, and she has even translated the one of the first publications on Turkish miniatures by Filiz Jamal and Nurhan Atasoy. Mm-hmm. And this really her this certainly inspired research, yes. Especially because she was deeply interested in, illustrated manuscript illustration.
Thank you, and I hope that we can continue speaking about it in our Q&A session afterwards. So thank you very much, Günsel. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Julian Raby, Director Emeritus of the Freer Gallery of Art and the Arthur M. Sackler Gallery. Prior to his tenure at the Freer and the Sackler, Dr. Raby was university lecturer in Islamic art and architecture at Oxford University, chairman of curators of the Oriental Institute, and chairman of the Board of Faculty of Oriental Studies. Dr. Raby supervised over 60 special exhibitions while he was at the Freer and the Sackler, and is the author of numerous publications which have been groundbreaking, not only for Turkish and Ottoman art, but also Persian and Arab art. So, Julian, I cede the floor to you.
Esin was a huge character. Sharp, stylish, confident, determined, disciplined, and precise. And yes, vivacious too. One of my fondest memories was when a large group of us attended the International Congress of Turkish Art in Poland in 1983. We took a night train from Krakow to Warsaw, and a bunch of friends and I were just moaning about our failure to buy some alcohol when, like a dea ex machina, in came Esin, cigarette lighter in one hand, a bottle of whiskey in the other. It was one of the best congresses I ever attended. Esin's sense of confidence and thoroughness is a hallmark of her publications. They bear her stamp. But they were also a product of their times, and they demonstrate how quick Esin was, not just to seize, but also to forge opportunities. If we make a list of her publications, and this isn't even complete, it makes for impressive reading. If we pile the books, and again, not complete, their heft is impressive. Others will and have discussed the content of her books. So I've been asked to provide something of an overview, and particularly the public outreach aspect of it, because her impact extended far beyond the field of academics and conoscenti to a wider public. Esin's books played a major role in broadening interest, raising awareness, and in Turkey, heightening a sense of national pride. The books covered an impressive range from individual media, ceramics, metalwork, drawings, paintings, to a broad survey of Turkish art, as we've just heard, to a focus on individual manuscripts. Now, Esin started at the Freer in 1970, as we've heard, and was immediately at work publishing. But nothing about her first two publications suggests the wonders to come. In 1971, she published Exhibition of 2,500 Years of Persian Art. The Iranian ambassador wrote in a letter published in this booklet that this was part of the United States celebration of the 2,500th anniversary of the founding of the Persian Empire by Cyrus the Great and of the Declaration of Human Rights. Well, considering the grandiose commemoration, this was a modest booklet covering in brief entries 83 objects in the Freer, each of which was illustrated in black and white. Designed locally, it was printed locally in Baltimore. In 1973, Esin again responded to a diplomatic overture for a booklet to mark the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Turkish Republic. The Turkish collection in the Freer was far more limited, and the booklet covered just some 25 objects, and the booklet itself was relatively small. And Walter, like you, I've had difficulty tracking it on my bookshelves. Interestingly, this booklet was not designed or printed in the US, but in Turkey. The booklet bears the Freer's and the Smithsonian's names on the title page, but a note on the flyleaf reads, "This book is the property of the Cultural Affairs Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Turkey." In other words, Esin, rather than the museum leaders, understood the importance of a diplomatic gesture, and it was to stand her in great stead, as Zeynep will doubtless explain later. 73 also saw the publication that was put down a marker, Ceramics from the World of Islam. It not only included some great objects, but this was a book that was large in size, elegantly, if conservatively designed, with generous margins and a fairly relaxed type. It didn't include much that was groundbreaking in scholarly terms, but its importance was huge and can only be appreciated if we understand a little bit of the context. I'm not going to review it here, but I just need to state how shocked I was to really discover how few books were published on Islamic pottery between 1945 and 1975. Arthur Lane's early Islamic pottery and later Islamic pottery dominated the field. Masterful accounts, but they included very few color photos. They were really for the cognoscenti. There were also some small museum booklets, but this was, if you like, the era of thumbnail black and white. John Carswell's two grand volumes, Kütahya Tiles and Pottery, were published in 1972 and were exceptional, but I hope you'll agree, a rather niche subject. Esin's ceramics book, however, ranged across the breadth of high-end ceramic production. The book had a grand and generous feel, photos on a scale not seen before. So the question is, what prompted the change from the two modest booklets we've just seen to this book? In fact, it was part of 3 exhibitions that were held at the Freer to mark the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Freer. Top left was Harold Stern's ukiyo-e painting. Bottom right, Tom Lawton's book on Chinese figure painting. The third volume, the third exhibition, was Esin on Islamic ceramics. So this was essentially a director-led initiative to honor the Freer legacy more publicly, because Freer publications up till then had largely been aimed at a scholarly audience. These 3 books were not primarily academic volumes. They did not include extensive scholarly apparatus. Harold Stern stresses in his forewords to these books Charles Langsfreer's emphasis on beauty. And these three books express not only the beauty of the objects in the frieze, but the restrained, elegant aesthetic of the museum itself. Cumulatively, this trio of books had a massive impact. They put the quality of the frieze collection across this wide range on a wider map. Esin's book on ceramics was a marked change from what was being produced at the time on Islamic pottery. And we can see three novelties. She included scientific tests, though these were not actually reproduced in the volume itself. Interestingly, she also included side views. You could see bottom left, the side view of this incredibly important dish. And third, she included the full inscriptions in Arabic or in Persian. And Kamal Bulata, a Palestinian artist who was at the Corcoran School of Art at the time, was the artist responsible. And she even included a table of the different types of inscriptions. The influence of these publications was enhanced by the accompanying sale of packs of 35mm color slides. These slides had a huge impact on the teaching of Asian art, and they helped make the frieze objects icons in their field. Yet the initiative in these three books was only partially followed up by the museum. Two other books produced in 75 and 76 adopted roughly the same basic principle of design, but the reproductions were smallish, the pages packed. From a publishing point of view then, the museum had taken a bit of a step backward. Esin, on the other hand, was certainly not stuck in a rut. She followed up on the success of ceramics from the world of Islam in dazzling fashion. There was, about these three books that we've looked at, a rather patrician severity. Elegant, but a little formal. By contrast, there was a freedom and immediacy, a sense of brilliant, colourful sunshine, and a sense of the tactile about Esin's next publication, which came out in 1975, Art of the Arab World. Let's start with the cover. A die-cut, laminated, and it included an envelope flap. There's an immediate sense when you look at this that this isn't an ordinary book. If you know, the cover alerts you to the association with the Muslim world. If you don't, it's intriguing. This is certainly a book that deserves to be judged by its cover. And even the doublure reproduces the doublure of the original binding. And it was in a square format, a novelty for museum catalogues of the period. Inside, it played with a contrast of materials, sections of tinted, textured, laid paper, contrasting with glossy sections printed in 4-color. The contrast creates variety and tactile interest. It wasn't just about the look, but even the feel of the book. And it broke the mold completely by using close-ups and cutouts. As we'll see, the photos play with scale, and here images across spreads, not locked on a single page. The typography was beautiful, effortless. Art of the Arab World was not, however, a frieze initiative. It wasn't part of a broader publishing concept by the museum. No, the impetus and the inspiration came from outside. And in this case, the impetus wasn't from a foreign government. The impulse came from the Mobil Oil Corporation. It was, in fact, one of a number of publications Mobil commissioned from the brilliant British designer Derek Birdsall, and I show you a photograph of him here, and Shreve, who worked with him, will tell you more about Derek. In his notes on book design, Birdsall doesn't expressly discuss the art of the Arab world, but it's interesting to see what he has to say about another Mobil book, The Living Treasures of Japan. This was a commemorative volume for the 80th anniversary of Mobile Sekiu. And he says, "This book marks the beginning of my love affair with the square format." Art of the Arab World was, I think still is, a sensation. An extraordinary collection with detailed discussion of each object by the assiduous Esin. And as John Carswell said in a review of this book, Atıl's skillful handling of the verbal material is further enhanced by Derek Birdsall's design. His use of distant and close-up views of the same object induces a sensation akin to actually advancing on an object in the gallery, advancing in order to get a closer look. Mobile provided the impetus, they provided the connection to Birdsall and the all-important funding. And I suspect a key figure here was Jack Hayes, the director for cultural programs at Mobile. Despite the triumph of Esin's publication, its design concepts were largely ignored by the Freer, which anyway published little for several years. Art of the Arab World was perhaps too radical, and preference was then given to a slightly more conservative approach. Yet this book, catapulted Freer's Islamic collection into the first rank, as had her ceramics from the Islamic world. The impact of Art of the Arab World for Esin's and for Birdsall's careers was huge. Birdsall went on to produce many publications for American museums, especially for the National Gallery of Art. And as Shreve will tell us, he designed one of the Freer's most spectacular productions, Shreve's book on the Haftarah. Now, Esin continued in exemplary fashion to publish the parts of the Freer Islamic collection. She produced Brush of the Masters in 1978, drawings from Iran and India. And 7 years later, she produced a catalogue that we'll hear much more about from Oya, a catalogue of the Islamic metalwork. Brush of the Masters was not a complete catalogue, but an exhibition catalogue, whereas the metalwork book was a more comprehensive look. It was surely Esin who paid homage to Derek Birdsall by insisting on the square format of Islamic metalwork. The book was groundbreaking in the context of a catalogue of Islamic works of art, as it fully incorporated scientific analysis. And two colleagues from the Conservation Department, Tom Chase and Paul Jett, were co-authors with Esin, as you can see from the title, from the cover page at the bottom of this slide. Yet Esin's sight was shifting to broader horizons and broader audiences. This wasn't really possible within the context of the Freer, which was still unable to show its objects alongside works from other collections. There was, though, a more expansive environment within the Smithsonian. And here I talk specifically about two units, Smithsonian Publications and Smithsonian Traveling Exhibitions, known by the acronym CITES. But talking of broader horizons, Günsel has clearly pointed out the importance of her book, comprehensive book, a survey, Turkish Art, which she produced with Smithsonian Publications. I want to concentrate, however, on her remarkable exhibition, The Renaissance of Islam, the Art of the Mamluks, which we'll hear more about from Doris, but I'm going to look at it really from the point of view of design and its impact on the public. This was an exhibition organized by CITES, the Smithsonian Traveling Exhibitions. The catalogue was produced by Smithsonian Publications. With the Freer unable to show works from other collections, the Washington venue was, across them all, at Natural History. Well-researched, well-documented, it's remained a standard in the field, as it provided the first technicolor vision of Mamluk decorative arts. Like Art of the Arab World, it was substantially funded by Mobile, and once again designed by Derek Birdsall. Derek Birdsall used his favoured square format and again the mix of laid and gloss paper. The book was also published in Arabic, and Birdsall is interesting here on the design, and I show you here from the notes, his book, Notes on Book Design. The pronounced symmetry of the cover and the text spreads, emphasized by the epigraphic blazons, anticipates the subsequent Arabic tradition. The Arabic book is a mirror image of the English edition. Reading left to right, the layout is reversed in every detail. Facilitated by silhouetting, groups of objects are shown to the same scale across a given spread. To explain that better, on the left you have the English version, on the right you have the Arabic version. So you can see how he used his favoured format, but was thinking ahead to a book that was going to be published in Arabic. So we have drama, but we also have discipline. We have symmetry, scaling, silhouetting, and double page spreads. Birdsall not only achieved a seamless move to an Arabic edition, but a book that allowed plenty of breathing space that dignified the objects. Oleg Grabar, in reviewing the exhibition and the accompanying conference, emphasized the limitations of the taxonomic approach, but graciously conceded that this was understandable in an emerging field. What he perhaps failed to convey was how the design of the catalogue pulled viewers into the objects Esin was presenting. In the following year, in 1976, the World of Islam Festival Trust organized in London the largest and most ambitious exhibition of Islamic art since the Munich exhibition of 1910. It's worth reflecting how it was the inverse of Esin's Mamluk show. For the London exhibition had truly remarkable objects and some extraordinary theatrical moments, but it was accompanied by an exhibition catalogue that remains a utilitarian record, almost devoid of visual appeal and impact. In other words, the catalogue of the London exhibition has not provided the legacy that exhibition deserved. Esin's Mamluk show included objects of sometimes varying quality, and at least in Washington, the mise en scène was not the greatest of successes. The catalogue of Esin's Mamluk exhibition, however, was a visual triumph and remains a lasting tribute to Mamluk art. The Mamluk show subsequently went on to an incredible 8 other venues in the US. And we can see here how Esin is at the forefront of the wave of traveling exhibitions that took place in the 80s and 90s. Advances in color printing, the involvement of major corporations led to increasingly lavish publications. And a major player here was the National Gallery of Art, led, of course, by J. Carter Brown. Carter Brown, struck by the potential of the Mamluk show, provided Esin with a platform at a time when she was still associated with the Smithsonian, but increasingly estranged from the Freer. With Carter Brown's support, she was able to produce a major book, the great Ottoman manuscript, the Süleyman-Name, which came out in 1986. And then in the following year, the National Gallery of Art organized one of the most successful shows of Islamic art, The Age of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. And magnificent it certainly was. It's difficult to overemphasize the importance of this traveling exhibition, its impact for scholars and for the general public. Now, in 1993, Esin left the Smithsonian, but this did not cramp her. Huge changes had taken place in Turkey. The great exhibition, Anatolian Civilizations in 1983, created great enthusiasm for Turkey's cultural heritage. And over the next decade, we see book publishing in Turkey transformed by major patronage, superb photography, design, and printing. And Esin is at the forefront here. She worked, for example, with Ertuğ on images of Imperial Istanbul, a manuscript in Dresden. And a few years later, she produced her book on the Surname that we saw a moment ago, designed by Ersu Pekin. And in terms of patronage, her Suleiman Name and then the Levni was sponsored by 2 generations of the Koch family. So to conclude, Esin's books do not reveal a consistent design approach. Instead, their consistency lies in Esin's insistence on the primacy of the object. And in her association with Derek Birdsall in particular, she achieved her aims with huge success. Esin was above all responsive to opportunities. With the new wave of corporate funding for museum publications, she was able to produce art of the Arab world. She also responded to the wave of major loan exhibitions in her Mamluk and Suleiman exhibitions. And in her final books, devoted to single manuscripts, she was riding a bigger wave, a new patronage and creative environment in Turkey. This all contributed to a great sense of awareness and pride in Turkey's artistic heritage. But Esin's response to opportunities only tells part of the story. It fails to convey Esin's vigorous role in creating those waves. She wasn't just riding, she was making waves. At so many points, she was a trailblazer. Our field, the general public in the United States and Europe, and the public in Turkey all owe her a huge debt. And here, Esin, I want to thank you. Your publications sparked my admiration and affection for the Freer when I was a graduate. Ultimately, they influenced my decision to leave Oxford for Washington. I owe you a special thanks.
Thank you, Julian, for that sort of wonderful overview of Esin's publications, which also really underscores her amazing eye. And as you said, she was so ahead of her time in her publications and the way that they look and feel and are still relevant today and still keep the Freer collection in many ways at the forefront of scholarship. So thank you for that oversight. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Doris Behrens-Abouseif, who is a professor emerita at SOAS University of London, where she served as the Nasser Di Khalili Chair of Islamic Art and Archaeology from 2000 to 2014, and held positions at the American University in Cairo, the universities of Freiburg and Munich in Germany, as well as numerous other professorships. Her publications cover a wide range of subjects, from the early Islamic period to the 19th century, with focus on Egypt and Syria. And she has been busy producing more publications, and 2 of her most recent books are the book in Mamluk Egypt and Syria, 1250 to 1517, and Scribes, Libraries, and Markets of 2018. Doris, the floor is yours.
I'm very pleased to be part of this event. Thank you very much for inviting me, Masumeh. And when your invitation came, I really felt enthusiastic about this initiative. And I, unlike my predecessor speakers, I did not know Esin well. I met her only 4 or 5 times and rather briefly. However, a spectacular exhibition catalogue and her work have accompanied my teaching over the years and in being indispensable for my teaching as well as for my research. I do not know how I would have taught my classes of the decorative art of Islam or of Ottoman art without Esin Atıl work on my side. And I never stopped consulting her book, The Renaissance of Islam, Art of the Mamluks. Next slide, bitte, please. Next slide. Yes, I just want to show, I'm not usually quite tidy with my books in my library, but this book is particularly worn, and I was reluctant, almost embarrassed about it. But on the other hand, it shows how much I have been used, and I'm still using this book. It is the most worn looking book in my own library. And this book is also the main subject of my homage to Esin Atıl today, Renaissance of Islam, Art of the Mamluks. uh, it was published as the catalogue of the exhibition on this subject in Washington in 1981, and the exhibition was accompanied by a conference that was published under the title Art of the Mamluks 3 years later in 1984 in a dedicated issue of Muqarnas. I'm very happy that Julian already described the look of the book and its design, because this is not exactly my concern in this talk. The exhibition catalogue and the catalogue were dedicated to the decorative art and the art of the book, whereas the conference and its publication dealt with a broader choice of topics that included architecture, archaeology, as well as social and cultural matters. By emphasizing Mamluk art on the map of art history, this double event was of groundbreaking significance. It also announced a new interest among art historians, museum curators, to focus on a single period, and in this case, Mamluk art. Mamluk art hitherto had not been viewed as a discipline in its own right, but rather discussed through various specific subjects and media: architecture, heraldry, epigraphy, costume, painting, illumination, glass, metalwork, costume, etc. Mamluk architecture was discussed in the context of individual monuments, mostly located in Cairo and identified with Cairo, associated with Cairo, before Meineke included Syria in his studies, notably in his monograph 1992. The exhibition was not the first initiative by Esin Atıl to dedicate attention with a new approach to the arts of the Arab world. In 1975, as we heard already, she had organized, I think, a smaller exhibition accompanied by a catalogue art of the Arab world. Geographically, the exhibition covered Syria, Iraq, and Egypt, and periodically from the period from the Umayyads to the end of the Mamluk period, displaying illuminated and illustrated manuscripts, ceramics, metalwork from the Shria collections to document, as she said, Arab civilization. With this initiative, she revived the notion of an Arab and Arabic artistic identity, which had lost momentum at that time already in favor of Islamic identities. No matter, of course, there is perhaps sponsorship or the patronage of the book may have played a role in this approach, but it remains a fact. The label Arab art has been used to be has been applied by the first generation of art historians in the 19th century, and later replaced by Islamic art. It was avoided after that, and only to be used in the more narrow context of Arab painting. This trend continues to the present day. For example, the recent exhibition at the Met, Byzantium and Islam, was in fact about Byzantium and the Arab world, or Byzantium and the Arabs. And even in Egypt itself, historians regularly use the label Islamic art of Cairo or Islamic art of Egypt, alongside dynastic labels. While Turkish and Iranian artistic identities have recently enjoyed great patronage and art historical attention, I must recall Esin Atıl's perspective and her initiative to put an art of the Arab world as on the map, which has, and this effort or this perspective has not been further pursued, and in my view, It should be recalled here, perhaps also to stimulate initiative in similar directions. But coming back to the Renaissance of Islam art of the Mamluk, at the time when the book was published, I was not yet a historian of Mamluk art or a historian of art. I had recently completed my studies of Islamic history in Germany and was at that time in Cairo studying Islamic art at AUC, at the American University. Unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to see this exhibition. But in preparation for her exhibition, Esin came to Cairo to acquire objects from the Islamic Museum and the National Library. On this occasion, she was invited to give us a lecture at the American University. This was when I met her for the first time, a good-looking, smart young lady. And I remember also how impressed I was when the chair of the lecture, I don't remember who it was, said in his introduction that Esin Atıl had at that time published 17 books. Her talk was about late Mamluk painting, which was also the subject of her contribution to the conference that accompanied her exhibition, and also a subject which she dedicated attention in the catalogue itself. In this paper, next slide, please. In this paper, she introduced the so far unknown illustrated manuscript of an Iskandar-Nameh of Ahmadi, commissioned by the Mamluk Emir Khushkadam ibn Abdallah, which is presently at the Istanbul University Library, and also the Shahnameh of Sultan Al-Ghuri at the Topkapi, which here is an illustration. And in fact, she is the one who gave me the slide which I use for this picture here. And in this was the lecture, like the catalogue and like also her article in the conference publication, were very well illustrated with several images from these two manuscripts. These two manuscripts are so far the only one to be identified as illustrated manuscripts with as princely commissions in the 15th century in the Mamluk period. So the images and the material revealed in this article, as well as in the book, were an outstanding contribution, in my view, or among the most outstanding contributions to this event. Only an earlier article by Nurhan Atasoy had dealt with the Shahnameh of Al-Ghuri before that. And the further investigation on both manuscripts would be highly valuable and highly needed as well for the understanding of Mamluk art and culture. The Renaissance of Islam was memorable also because it valued Mamluk art as a Renaissance of Islam. In his introduction to the catalogue, next slide, please. In his introduction to the catalogue of the exhibition, the secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, S. Dillon Ripley, justified the choice of the subject, art of the Mamluk, by describing it as a blossoming in a bouquet of artistry at a given moment in time. However, referring to this second part, or the first part, in fact, of the title, Renaissance of Islam, he added, the title of this book is not entirely accurate. The Mamluk were not artists, nor did they provide a perfect stability for the lands over which they reigned, yet they were men of vision and practicality. Then he goes on a bit further. Mamluk society found it natural to divert vast proportions of its wealth to the support of artists and craftsmen. It was equally natural for those artists to reflect this generosity by devoting their creative efforts to the glorification of their benefactors. Of course, although this latter interpretation of Mamluk art and its patronage cannot be endorsed, and I doubt that Esin Atıl herself would have fully agreed with this description, many colleagues at that time agreed, and perhaps would do so today, that the description of Mamluk art as a renaissance of Islam might be perhaps an exaggeration. The Renaissance in Europe was not merely about artistry, but it was rather associated with the humanistic movement and the state of mind that revolutionized European culture. So far, research on the Mamluk period and research on Islamic humanism has not associated the Mamluk regime or the Mamluk state with a comparable role, although in view of the literary wealth and productivity of the Mamluk period, the question still deserves to be raised. Apart from the suggestive title, Esin Atıl did not venture in conceptual speculations on Mamluk art. Rather, she focused on a very detailed and thoroughly documented book. This was done, the speculation, by Oleg Raby in his introduction to the conference, published to the conference publication, which was under the title Reflections on Mamluk Art. Raby described most of the research presented in the conference and in the publication and the exhibition as understandably taxonomic. And he proposed a new approach, which he, however, did not exactly define. But he raised, as he often did, many questions and proposed several venues. His final remark referred to the fundamental question whether the methods of study of a subject like Mamluk art should be determined by universal principles or by the cultural particularities of a specific moment in history. Well, he did not answer this question, but he put it at the concluding remark of his article. The answer to this question was rather provided by the social historian of the Mamluk era, Ira Lapidus, in his concluding chapter of the conference book. There, he mentions the necessity of gathering an exhaustive body of data, of artifacts and texts, which must be then related to other forms of culture and to the historical context in which they were produced. Esin Atıl's catalog was a fundamental contribution and a major step towards supplying, as he said, a body of data of artifacts, including their epigraphy. The dimensions of the catalog of such a catalog is normally achieved as by a collective edited publication rather than by a single author, as is the case. A solid historical introduction is followed by chapters documenting various media, and each chapter which is own also solid introduction about the subject. The topic or the chapters were about illuminated manuscripts, metalwork, glass, ceramic, woodwork, ivory and stone carving, textiles and drugs, and illustrated manuscript. And it's interesting, she put the illuminated manuscript at the beginning of the book and the illustrated manuscript at the end of the book, and did not deal with them in the same, under the same category. The choice of the items put together was highly ambitious, with exhibits from major museums worldwide. The entries were detailed, well-researched, and based on new research equivalent each to a small article. She took also on the challenge to try to decipher difficult and uncommon inscriptions that have not been considered before. Next one, please. For example, in this box, pen box in the Louvre Museum, which is a very complex object in terms of its inscriptions. And in fact, Esin Atıl has put in on every entry the inscription. So tried to say, read them all, or tried to read them, or show the gaps when it was not possible, and show the difficulty when it was not possible to done. And in this case, which is, I am working currently on this object, it's extremely difficult to decipher. She has been able to really do a pioneer work in trying as much as possible to read this difficult poetical text. And at the same time, although she could not decipher it completely, she still at the end could manage to say a great deal about the sponsor of this, or the patron of this object, who it might have been, and what kind of person he was, just on reading the inscription. But not also, this is a famous, well-known, it is not necessarily a princely piece, we don't know who the name of the patron exactly, but also in other cases, she had the courage and the initiative to put objects that nobody had looked at before. Like in the next slides, for example, these are not the obvious glamorous pieces of Mamluk metalwork that you would see, for example, as you see them in the exhibition catalog of the Festival of Islam. But and this piece was here published for the first time, and it is a complex piece. It is interesting because it has a poetic vernacular inscription that no one had tried to read before ever. And here she did, and she largely managed to decipher this inscription here, as in other cases as well. And she covered the entire period, the Mamluk period, evenly, not only the golden age of the first period, but she went as well as in the next slides to look at objects which indeed are less glamorous, difficult to decipher, and which have not been necessarily at that time looked at or considered in exhibitions of art, as for example, again, in the Festival of Islamic Art. So, because in my recent research, I have come particularly, and which is at the moment I'm working on these less glamorous objects, which with interesting and remarkable inscription. And recently again, I came to renew my appreciation for Esin's work, in that she had, for having looked at this object, given them the attention which they deserve, and tried to solve their riddle. The book also has an exhaustive bibliography on the subject of Mamluk art, which is credited in Esin's acknowledgement to Marianne Shrif Simpson. One of the merits of this bibliography is that it also included all major studies written in Arabic by Egyptian scholars on subjects related to Mamluk art and material art. For example, the pioneer studies of Hassan Abdul Wahab, which continue to be an important reference in Mamluk art and which are largely or often ignored in Western studies. Here, everything is there in the bibliography, and it is really an admirable bibliography. I want to mention on this occasion that when I published my book, Introduction to the Muslim Architecture of Cairo in 1986, I also there was no alternative, and it was necessary and evident that I cite Hassan Abdul Wahab as among my major references. However, an American reviewer of the book criticized me just for doing so and for referring to this unknown source. Well, again, now I will have to here to talk about my own experience and in relation to Esin Atıl's work. When in 2009, I organized a conference on Mamluk art at SOAS, my ambition was to have a double event with an exhibition as well, even a small one, in London. The idea was to, by creating a double event or organizing a double event, to refer to the exhibition conference of 1981 in order to have a framework to assess what Mamluk art studies have achieved in the meantime. Very sadly, I couldn't persuade curator colleagues to organize an exhibition. While the SOAS conference and its publication reflected the current scholarship of Mamluk art, as has been the case with the conference of 1981, the absence of an exhibition that would have provided a panoramic perspective and background left an important gap in the event. And in fact, there is an important gap, remains an important gap, although numerous studies on specific subjects and objects of Mamluk art have been published in the meantime since 1981, the global picture is uneven and shows important gaps. At the same time, the studies of Mamluk art history and culture, which have tremendously expanded in recent years, show very limited interest by its community for art and material culture. So due to all these combined circumstances, Esin Atıl's book on Mamluk art remains a major source to the present day. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Doris, for that wonderful talk in really sort of contextualizing Esin's contribution to the study of Arab art, and especially Mamluk art. I think it was sort of wonderful to hear how it fits into the bigger picture in terms of its content and what it tried to do. So thank you very much for that talk. And now for our last speaker before the break that I'm sure you're all waiting for, but we have a and we have a treat for you during the break. I just wanted to mention that we will have some more photographs of Esin during the break that I'm sure you will all enjoy. But before we go to the break, it is my pleasure to introduce Oya Pancaroğlu, who received her PhD in Islamic art and architecture from Harvard University in the year 2000, and is currently a professor in the Department of History at Boğaziçi University in Istanbul. Her research interests include Islamic architecture in medieval Anatolia, ceramic production in medieval Persian world, and figural representation in Islamic art. Her recent publications include Ismail Ağa, Bayashir and architectural patronage in 13th century Anatolia, and Conditions of Love and Conventions of Representation in the illustrated manuscript of Varka and Gulsha. Oya, the floor is yours.
So thank you also for this invitation to this wonderful remembrance of Esin, and I'm really pleased but honored to be in this very illustrious company. I personally met Esin first as an undergraduate. This was some years before her retirement from the Freer, but it was definitely after her major achievement, the Süleyman the Magnificent exhibition and the catalog and the publications around it that have already been mentioned. So I was, suitably intimidated by her, but quickly my intimidation turned to gratitude. I was an undergraduate studying art history with a little clue about what goes on in museums. So I met her, and she kindly steered me to be what was then called a behind-the-scenes volunteer. Not with her, but with then the new curator for South Asian art at the Freer Sackler, Carol Bolan. Now, I'd like to say the rest is history, except that it's not. I did not become a curator. I did not study South Asian art. But the Freer and Sackler galleries are very near and dear to my heart, and I do have Esin to thank for this most meaningful kind of acquaintance with the world of museums. So it took a little bit of thinking on my part to decide how I might contribute towards this remembrance. And finally, I decided to speak a little bit about Esin's work on objects from the medieval period, especially on metalwork. At first, though, I thought maybe I had picked too narrow a subject. It's kind of a niche subject, perhaps for those in the audience, at least. But when I focused on it, I realized that it would give me an opportunity to see how this one thread, that is metalwork, weaved in and through Esin's career, especially in the 1970s and 1980s. Now, those decades, the 70s and then the 80s, are actually quite pivotal in the broader panorama of the historiography of Islamic art in the late 20th century. And it occurred to me that we have not really thought about those years, which were, in fact, really productive in terms of solid and smart exhibitions and accompanying publications. And of course, as we've heard already, Esin played a really significant role in that sense. So when we think of Esin and Islamic metalwork, of course, the first thing that comes to our mind is this wonderful catalog that she produced with her two colleagues in what was then called the Technical Laboratory, I guess now the Conservation Department of the museum, with W.T. Chase and Paul Jett. This catalog accompanied an exhibition of the same title held in 1985 at the Freer. In addition to its numerous merits, including its design, as Julian has already pointed out, this catalog is also significant as it represents the culmination of a series of exhibitions and accompanying catalogs conceived and executed by Esin, especially, but not exclusively, around the collections of the Freer Gallery during her curatorship of Islamic Near Eastern art at the Freer. As we know, after 1985, her attention was directed more intensively towards Ottoman art, which was in fact only natural, given that that was the subject of her PhD. And she then launched onto these this major exhibition project on the period of Suleiman the Magnificent. That catalog that I just showed, the catalog on metalwork, represents in a way the tail end of Esin's curatorial period at the Freer Gallery. As we know, she joined the Freer Gallery of Art immediately after receiving her PhD from the University of Michigan in 1969. And it's interesting to note that in the beginning of her career, her first scholarly publication as a newly minted PhD was also on the topic of Islamic metalwork and not on the topic of her PhD on Ottoman painting. Here you see the first page of this article that she published on two inlaid candlesticks in the collection of the University of Michigan Museum of Art. It was published in the journal Kunst des Orients in 1972, so just only about 3 years after she graduated. Although it is not explicitly stated in the article, it is reasonable to assume that she conducted the research while she was a graduate student at Michigan in the 1960s. As an educated guess, I would even venture to say that this article was probably born from a graduate seminar, most likely taught by Oleg Grabar, most likely on the topic of objects. So the focus of the article, it's on these two candlesticks in the University of Michigan Museum of Art collection. These two actually belong to a fairly sizable group of candlesticks of the same form and dimensions. You can see the two are nearly identical in terms of form and dimensions. They are now commonly attributed to 13th or 14th century Anatolia. But at the time that Esin was researching and writing her article, they were being attributed to Azerbaijan, or more specifically to Tabriz. That attribution was in fact made earlier in the 1950s in the work of David Storm Rice. Now, it's the images, I downloaded these from the University of Michigan Museum of Art website, but they don't have very high resolution images, it seems. So just you have to take my word for it. The one on the left is decorated with inlaid silver and showing images, the representations of the labors of the months, of the 12 months. Whereas the one on the right has images that can be described as courtly scenes with a particular focus on the act of serving and drinking. Now, the one with the labors of the months was actually the subject which had gotten the attention of David Storm Rice earlier in the 50s, and this is why he had published on this material, not on the Michigan examples, but on the other examples. And when David Storm Rice first researched this corpus, the number of known candlesticks of this form and dimension was somewhere in the 30s, around 33. Through her research, Esin brought that number up to more than 50. And since then, the number has increased to nearly 70. Esin's article on the subject was focused on the 2 Michigan candlesticks. And as she stated in the beginning, she aimed to provide a full description, as she says, of the 2 objects, along with a series of comparisons to situate their iconography in a broader visual context in order to get a sense of the sources of the imagery, the possible sources of the imagery, and the interrelationships among them. She delivered on her promise admirably. What made her descriptions full, I think, actually were not so much the length of it, although it is in fact rather lengthy, but it was really these numerous subtle observations on small but critical details of the iconography, as well as the ornamental elements of decoration. In making comparisons, she accounted for the common points as well as for the discrepancies between various examples in the corpus. Ultimately, in this article, she did not revise Rice's initial attribution of the corpus to Azerbaijan or to Tabriz specifically. But I think what she did was more important than that, because she offered a subtle reflection on image making as a process rather than simply as a given product. So this 1972 article and the 1985 exhibition catalog are 2 bookends in Esin's some 15 years of curatorial work at the Freer Gallery. And by an interesting coincidence, at least interesting to me, they are both on metalwork. In between those 2 bookends, of course, she intermittently, I would say perhaps even frequently, had occasion to publish on metalwork. So these 2 catalogs about which we've already heard quite a bit, the ones with the wonderful square format, both of them contain, they're chock full of examples of metalwork. Also, we might look at the more ephemeral example of her publication. This is a handout produced for the benefit of the visitors to the gallery, probably sometime around 1985. It's a two-sided page, A4 or letter size, and very much kind of showcasing the heavyweights in the collection of the Freer. And I have to thank Shreve for unearthing these gems and for kind of putting this, giving me a chance to put this kind of blast from the past, which is more ephemeral than those, heavy exhibition catalogs that are very much present on the shelves that they sit on in our libraries. Now, we could go on. Esin's involvement with metalwork, looking at examples of objects that were acquired by the Freer in the 1970s and in the early 80s. This is, of course, falls right during Esin's curatorship. These are objects that were bought on the art market in London and New York. Presumably, Esin was really the decision maker in choosing these objects for the Freer, And clearly she must have chosen them with an eye to kind of filling gaps such as that existed in this otherwise, of course, quite wonderful collection of metalwork in the Freer. And my favorite is this bird-shaped vessel. Was acquired in 1973, and I never had a chance to ask Esin about it, but I assumed that she had something kind of humorous to say about it. Now, interestingly, one of the metalwork objects acquired for the Freer during Esin's curatorship was a candlestick belonging to the same corpus as the two Michigan examples she had studied in her 1972 article. Now, having an intimate knowledge of this group of candlesticks, it is only natural that this acquisition would be made under Esin's watch in 1981. I can only imagine that she regarded it as a happy opportunity to incorporate this candlestick to the Freer collection. The occasion of this acquisition and of the Islamic metalwork exhibition 4 years later in 1985 created an opportunity for Esin to revisit the question of this distinctive corpus of candlesticks. Now, of course, by the time of the 1985 exhibition, much water had passed under the Islamic metalwork bridge. Much of it had passed in the early 1980s, when a remarkable spate of monographs and catalogs on metalwork were published. Here, I've just kind of put only the ones that would fit on a single slide, some of the key works that were published in this very few years between 1981 and 1983. On the left, at top and the bottom, you have two catalogs by James Allen. At the top, to the right there, we have another catalog, this one by Suren Melikian. All three of those appeared in 1982. This was followed in 1983 by Eva Behr's, here on the lower right, Eva Behr's survey of medieval Islamic metalwork. And then I've also put here just another example of another museum catalog, this one from Florence. So this is really probably only the tip of the iceberg, but it is quite a hefty tip. And all of these were the culmination of a very concentrated series of publications on metalwork, produced mainly as articles, not only, but mainly as articles, especially by starting with David Storm Rice in the 1950s, followed by Eva Behr and Geza Fehervari in the 60s and 70s, then Suren Melikian and James Allen from the end of the 60s, but through the 70s. And we could add more even to that list, including, for example, Boris Marshak in Soviet Russia in the 1970s. So given this very strong momentum of the previous 3 decades, it should come as no surprise that so many major publications were published in a matter of a few years in the early 1980s. Thus, when the Freer exhibition and its catalog joined the metalwork caravan in 1985, the scholarly landscape on Islamic metalwork was densely populated with a whole array of publications. These publications introduced previously unpublished objects or revised crucial details on known objects, especially attributions. Attribution of the corpus of candlesticks, which Esin had first published on in 1972, was also thrown in the air in the intervening years. At the end of the catalog entry for the Freer candlestick acquired in 1981, which she included in this catalog, Esin astutely summarized the somewhat dizzying horizon of attributions and reattributions with the following words. In the past, the entire group was attributed to Tabriz or to Western Iran. These pieces were recently assigned to Turkey. more specifically to Konya, the capital of the Seljuks of Anatolia, or to Siirt, a city in the southeast governed by the Artukids until the 15th century. Whether or not they were all made in one location or were produced in a wider region encompassing southeastern Turkey, northern Iraq and Syria, and northwestern Iran cannot yet be determined. With this cautious conclusion, Esin effectively passed the ball on the matter of candlesticks to the next generation, and she herself managed to stay above the fray, and it was quite a fray. So everything that we have heard so far today has only underlined and emphasized those singular qualities of Esin: her sense of style, her grasp of diplomacy, and her confident poise. My own brief look into a limited segment of her output is a tribute to her and to her amazing qualities. And this is where I would like to end. Thank you.
Thank you, Oya, for that wonderful talk. To focus on Esin's contribution to metalwork, we've heard about the Arab art. We know about ceramics, but it's sort of it's wonderful to get not only sort of these broad brush introductions to how Esin has changed the field, but also in sort of specific facets, and metalwork certainly is one of them. So thank you very much for that introduction and overview to what she did to change our understanding of Islamic metalwork. So on that note, we will take a short break of 10 minutes, and you're welcome to stay on, and I encourage you to stay on because we will show you some additional images of Esin, and I would like to thank the speakers, our colleagues, and Esin's family for sending in these images that really sort of, again, capture her depth, her style, her sense of humor, and much, much more. So enjoy the break, and we will be back at 20 past 11. Thank you. Hello, everyone. We're back to resume the program, but I would like to share one wonderful comment in the chats. I don't know if you had seen it or not, by Unda Sylvia, who said it's amazing that in all these photographs, Esin managed to keep her cigarette holder out of the image. A real Hanum Effendi. I thought that was a wonderful tribute to Esin, and it's true. She does not appear with a cigarette in any of these images. So I am delighted to continue the program with you this afternoon and introduce Zeynep Simavi. Zeynep is the Istanbul branch director of the American Research Institute in Turkey, ARIT. Previously, she worked as a program specialist for scholarly programs and publications at the Freer and the Sackler galleries. And it's wonderful to see Zeynep back on the screen. She's currently a PhD candidate in art history at the Istanbul Technical University. Her dissertation focuses on the curators, collectors, and major exhibitions of Turkish art from the early 20th century in the United States to the 1987 exhibition of the age of Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent. Zeynep, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Masume, for the introduction and also the invitation. And I also would like to thank Sana Mirza and Lisa Stein for all their work in the organization of this event. It really is an honor to take part in such a meaningful gathering in memory of Esin Atıl. And I have to say that I first met Esin Atıl in 2012 when I had just started working at the Freer and Sackler galleries, and I wanted to interview her on her Süleyman exhibition. And she was extremely generous and supportive to me on our very first meeting, and her generosity and support continued on over the years. And I have to say that it really meant a lot to have such an incredible role model in front of me as a young Turkish woman who just started her career at the place where she worked for so many years. And as all the other speakers, said, she left such a mark on the field, but also on many people who just wanted to follow her in her footsteps. And today, I will talk about her 1987 exhibition of the Age of Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent. This is an exhibition that put Esin Atıl in the spotlight as a curator and scholar, extending her reputation beyond the museum and scholarly circles, and it brought an unprecedented press and public attention to her work. When the Age of Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent exhibition opened at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. on January 25th, 1987, it was the first major international loan exhibition dedicated to the Ottoman art in the United States. During its 4-month stay in Washington, D.C., the exhibition was visited by almost 400,000 people, a record number for an Islamic art exhibition at its time. Later in that year, traveling to the Art Institute of Chicago in the summer and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the fall, the Age of Suleiman spent a full year in the United States, gathering raving reviews from the American press on the magnificence and splendor of Ottoman art and its cultural heritage in modern Turkey. Age of Suleiman marks an important turning point for the appreciation of Ottoman art in the United States and elsewhere. Following its North American success, the exhibition traveled to many other destinations in the following years, from the United Kingdom, Germany, and Hungary in Europe to Australia. Moreover, many other exhibitions on Ottoman art were organized across the United States in the following decade. Age of Suleiman's impact was not only felt in the rise of Ottoman studies in North America, but also in the succeeding exhibitions of Islamic art. With Esin Atıl's pioneering curatorial approach, Age of Suleiman exhibition accomplished what all international exhibitions desire: huge press coverage, unprecedented visitorship, and scholarly acclaim. Esin Atıl's achievement was due to her more than a decade-long hard work in her field of expertise, her strong ties of collaboration with colleagues from her country of origin, and her knowledge of and sensitivity to the needs of American museum visitors in their encounter with a little-known art tradition at the time. As early as 1973, while working on the Turkish art of the Ottoman period exhibition at the Freer Gallery of Art to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Republic of Turkey, Esin Atıl understood that it would be impossible to give an accurate picture of Ottoman art without works from Turkish national collections. However, due to a ban of international loan of artworks from Turkey that came into effect that very same year in 1973, Atıl knew that she would have to wait to organize such an exhibition. During that period, a prolific scholar and curator, as explained by all the speakers today, Esin Atıl worked on a number of exhibitions and publications presenting the diversity of the artistic traditions of the Islamic world, as well as continuing to spend considerable time on researching Turkish art. Her initial idea for a loan exhibition from Turkey was one on the Ottoman Imperial Workshop, Nakkaşhane, as she explained to me back in 2012. And indeed, her publications from this period, such as the Turkish Art of the Ottoman Period Catalog and her chapter on the arts of the book in the Turkish Art publication of 1980, demonstrate this research focus, where Atıl gives a detailed picture of the administrative structure and artistic production of Nakkaşhane. However, having to wait 10 years to realize her dream of organizing an Ottoman art exhibition from the national collections of Turkey resulted in Esin Atıl transforming her exhibition concept into a people-focused one, highlighting the patronage of one Ottoman Sultan. This decision was based on her personal observation as a curator in the United States, that the American public is interested in people stories. For Esin Atıl, the key to her success at attracting attention to an art tradition that the target public had almost none or very little previous knowledge of was telling the story through the personality and patronage of Suleiman, a fitting figure to introduce Ottoman art in a compelling way. Not only his period is considered to be the height of the Ottoman imperial power and artistic production, but also his life with military conquests, his artistic inclination, and family life offers a rich and complex story to introduce the Ottoman world to an audience that is not very familiar with it. In addition to these, Atıl also mentioned to me two other aspects of the Ottoman world that she thought would be attractive in an American context. The Ottoman visual vocabulary, with its floral designs, would find much relevance, especially in DC, where cherry blossoms are celebrated every spring with a festival and draw multitudes to the nation's capital. And the other one was the bicentennial anniversary of the United States Constitution, as Suleiman, known also as lawgiver in Turkey, is one of the inspirational figures for the American Constitution and is featured along with other world leaders with a bust in the capital. Framing the exhibition concept in this manner made the Age of Suleiman more accessible and relevant in a different cultural context. In addition to Esin Atıl's many years of experience as a museum curator and scholar of Islamic art in North America, concurrent developments in the field of art history in Turkey also significantly contributed to the success of the Age of Suleiman. During the 1982-83 academic year, while Esin Atıl was in Turkey with a Fulbright Islamic Civilization Research Award, an important large-scale exhibition was in preparation, as mentioned by many today. Organized as the Council of Europe's 18th Exhibition of European Art, the Anatolian Civilizations exhibition held in Istanbul in 1983 brought together 5,000 objects from 50 museums across Turkey. And many of these objects have never been previously published or even displayed. In addition to establishing the art historical periodization that continued to be used in the years to come, this exhibition also paved the way to the organization of many succeeding exhibitions that traveled overseas, among which Age of Suleiman is a close follower. Esin Atıl translated and edited the English version of the Selçuk and Ottoman art sections of the catalog. And as Walter Denny pointed out elsewhere, in the Selçuk and Ottoman sections of this exhibition, I'm quoting him here, scholars and the general public alike were able for the first time to glimpse the true vastness of the spectrum of Turkish art held in the collections of Turkish museums, here selected by a team of first-rate scholars whose intimate knowledge of these collections led to revelation after revelation. End of quote. Esin Atıl's access to the most recent scholarship in Turkey and close ties with Turkish colleagues, especially Filiz Çağman, enhanced the scholarship that she produced on the arts of the Suleiman period. Another important development that occurred in 1983 was that the Antiquities Law of 1973 that banned the loan of objects was replaced with another one, allowing international loans for exhibition purposes. Age of Suleiman exhibition was among the first few that obtained the permission to travel, and Esin Atıl's efforts, as explained by Professor Günsel Renda today, to make this possible was covered widely in the American press to point out the once-in-a-lifetime nature of the Age of Suleiman exhibition for the American public. As the Age of Suleiman became the first exhibition traveling to the United States from Turkey in more than 20 years, considerable amount of public relations efforts were conducted, starting 2 years before its opening date. On the morning of April 5th, 1985, then the Prime Minister of Turkey, Turgut Özal, during his state visit to the United States, joined a press event at the National Gallery to announce the exhibition in person, where he made the statement, quote, "I'm delighted to announce a major cultural exchange between Turkey and the United States, an exhibition devoted to the Age of Suleiman the Magnificent, organized by the National Gallery of Art. We're proud to display our national cultural heritage, which has contributed to the development of Western civilization. This exhibition will not only represent the highest aesthetic and technical achievement of Turkish artists, but will also highlight a remarkable ruler whose laws and judicial codes became the basis for the constitutions of many countries." End of quote. So in the 21 months between this first public announcement in 1985 and the opening of the exhibition in 1987, multiple press events were held in the United States and Turkey to inform the public and ensure extensive coverage of this important event, both in American and Turkish press by 3 groups. The National Gallery of Art as the organizer, Philip Morris Companies as the main sponsor, and the Embassy of Turkey in Washington all worked together to promote the exhibition. This combination of artistic, financial, and political backers had an important role in the success of the exhibition in terms of reaching to a very broad audience. In a Washington Post article, appearing as early as June 1986, the newspaper staff writer While reporting on the increase in the visitor numbers of the National Gallery from 3.8 million to 7.2 million, thanks to the blockbuster exhibitions, also referred to the Age of Süleyman, stating that it was anticipated to be the blockbuster of the year 1987. And indeed, satisfying these expectations, Age of Süleyman attracted 393,000 visitors in the 122 days it was open in Washington. And here on screen, you can see a number of the headlines featuring the reviews of the exhibition in the American press. So when the exhibition opened at the National Gallery, it featured 210 objects from 26 lenders, artworks from the Turkish national collections, especially from the Topkapı Palace museum collections, formed the majority, and they were complemented with loans from American, European, and other Near Eastern private and public collections. The exhibition presented the artistic production of the Süleyman era as the period when the Ottoman visual language was established. In contrast to earlier survey style or single medium focused exhibitions, Age of Süleyman offered a totally new approach by presenting a holistic view of the arts of the Ottoman Empire by focusing on the patronage of one sultan. With recurring art historical references in its curatorial narrative at each gallery, the exhibition informed the visitors of the Ottoman visual vocabulary such as Hatayi, Rumi, and Chintamani, of artistic styles like Saz and naturalistic, of artists such as Şahkulu, Karamemi, Ahmet Karahisari, along with Piri Reis and Matrakçı Nasu, of the techniques and visual vocabulary used in different mediums like ceramics, metalwork, textiles, along with the arts of the book. And for the arts of the book of its different genres, like the religious manuscripts of the Quran, along with secular texts like divans, illustrated historical manuscripts, and albums. And the exhibition's scholarly strength was furthered by two publications. The exhibition catalog, The Age of Sultan Süleyman the Magnificent, and the facsimile monograph, Süleymanname, the illustrated history of Süleyman the Magnificent, both are authored by Esin Atıl herself. In these publications, Atıl gives a vivid and holistic view of the arts of the period by presenting the readers the context of production, function, artists if known, techniques employed, aesthetic qualities, visual vocabulary established, reception, as well as dissemination of the decorative repertoire from one medium to another. Historical and political context is provided with references to a wide variety of Ottoman archival documents and European diplomatic sources. Esin Atıl's depiction of Nakkaşhane in these publications, featuring information on the international background of its members, artistic repertoires that they brought with them to the Ottoman capital through their training and professional work in other Islamic courts, formation of a new visual vocabulary and genres out of this interaction of local and international artistic traditions represents the most detailed scholarship conducted on the Ottoman workshop. On the other hand, the Age of Süleyman resumed the traditional art historical approach of its period by featuring only royal collections. All throughout the exhibition, whatever medium is represented, the objects on view were created for the use of the Sultan or his family. And in line with this, the exhibition space also echoed the physical space of the Topkapı Palace. With 4 interconnecting galleries, the layout of the exhibition corresponded to the 4 courtyards of the palace. A panoramic view of Istanbul at the entry and the use of architectural elements such as columned archways as connecting links between galleries created an immersive environment, evoking in the visitors the feeling of being physically transported to the Topkapı Palace. At each gallery, the wall text introduced a different aspect of Süleyman and his court, offering context from 4 complementary perspectives, while the curatorial narrative in the object labels brought to the fore the art historical themes. In the first gallery, the wall text, The Süleyman Lawgiver, offers a broad context to the Ottoman political and religious system. It introduces the primary duty of the Sultan Süleyman as dispensing justice and reserving the right to issue firmans, along with his role as a spiritual leader of Muslims, and mentions the Ottoman endowment system. And for this theme, the objects featured along with Süleyman's Tura are the Quran manuscripts by calligraphers like Ahmet Karahisari and Şeyh Hamdullah, with exquisite bindings, embellished endowment documents, and furnishings from the endowed architectural complexes. The second gallery is the space where the military might and ceremonial aspects of the Ottoman culture are presented. The wall text, Süleyman the Magnificent, informs that Süleyman came to be known with this title in Europe through his military campaigns and the splendor of his court. In addition to explaining the symbolism behind the ceremonial use of his sword and canteen, it also talks about Ottomans' consciousness of their role in history and the beginnings of a new genre of historical texts, appearing at this period through the illustrated manuscripts, such as Selimname and Süleymanname, just to name a few, along with Ottoman armor. And the third gallery, titled as The Patronage of the Arts in the Wall Text, offers the visitors a glimpse into the interior of the palace, as well as the inner world of the Sultan. While talking about the prolific production of manuscripts, precious objects of richly patterned textiles, and underglazed ceramics used in the palace, it also informs the visitor that Süleyman was trained as a goldsmith and was a poet writing under the name Muhibbi. And reflecting the theme, on view are Süleyman's divans, album drawings and illuminations by Shah Kulu and Karamemi, along with Islamic and Chinese ceramics with Ottoman embellishments. And the most dramatic installation is in the last gallery, entitled The Splendor of the Court. Upon entering, the visitors encounter the Sultan's throne along with imperial robes or kaftans at each side, evoking an atmosphere of the Sultan materializing in a julus ceremony setting. Echoing the theme, this gallery showcases the Ottoman textiles, examples of kemha, serasar, and chatma, along with kaftans and accessories, rugs and carpets, quilts, and cushion covers. After a year-long tour in the United States, the Age of Süleyman received unprecedented praise and attention from the public, the press, and scholars alike. While in the Renaissance of Islam, Art of the Mamluks exhibition, Esin Atıl pioneered the idea of presenting Islamic art in dynastic terms, with the Age of Süleyman, she offered a people-focused perspective to entice the visitors to the world of Ottoman art. From a cultural diplomacy perspective, orchestrated promotion efforts coming from 3 channels, namely the National Gallery of Art, Philip Morris Companies, and the Embassy of Turkey, must have played a key role in garnering public attention. However, what seems to have appealed to the American audiences that knew very little or perhaps nothing at all of a sultan of a distant land and distant time was the employment of an engaging curatorial narrative with a very strong people focus, along with choice masterpiece objects and the dramatic design of physical gallery space, which were all a result of many years of scholarship and strong ties of collaboration with the originating country. Esin Atıl, along with her collaborators both in Turkey and the United States, accomplished to create an exhibition experience for the American public, easing their entry into the realm of the 16th century Ottoman Empire through the personage of Süleyman, the masterpieces of Ottoman art, and spatial references to the Topkapı Palace. Thank you.
Thank you, Zeynep, for taking us back to one of the most sort of memorable exhibition experiences. And you mentioned immersive, which is a term that is being used very much so in, currently. And again, if you look at Esin's contribution, you realize she did immersive long before anyone else. So thank you for that talk, and thank you for, again, giving us that detailed wonderful tour of the exhibition, which again, as I mentioned earlier, remains a landmark in our field. Now, Zeynep is going to return to give a talk prepared by our colleague Zeren Tanandi, who unfortunately cannot be with us today. But we very much wanted to have Zeren represented here because, again, she and Esin went back many, many years, and she is very much part of the story that we are telling today. Professor Zeren Tanandi received a doctorate from the Department of Art History at Istanbul University in 1971. From 1967 until 1984, she served as curator of the manuscript library at the Topkapı Saray Museum before joining the Bursa Museum and Bursa Uludağ University, where she chaired the Department of Art History until 2010. And many of us who studied at the Topkapı have benefited so much from Zeren's friendship and her guidance. She served as consultant to the Sabancı Museum and the Sackler Museum. She's an authority on Islamic and Turkish art of the book and has contributed to many publications. The most recent work includes Harmony of Line and Color, Illuminated Manuscripts, Documents, and Calligraphy in the Sackler Museum, which was published in 2019. Zeren will miss you. And here is Zeynep Simavi giving Zeren Tanandi's paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Masme. My memories of Esin. When Masme asked me to give a speech on Esin, I could not gather much in my mind about the times when she was working on the Topkapı Library manuscripts. However, after giving much thought, I remembered some and would like to summarize those for you. Firstly, I may say, Esin was a very hard worker, very serious, full of discipline, and very careful in each detail. I first met Esin at the Topkapı Saray Library around 1969, when she was working on the Surname for her PhD dissertation. Then in 1972, Filiz Çağman and Nurhan Atasoy were working on the publication Turkish Miniature Painting, and Esin was in Istanbul at the time. I think she was planning an exhibition on Turkish art in the Freer collection. She translated their book into English in Istanbul. Esin's exhibition catalog was published in 1973, and their book came out in 1974. Before the opening of the Anatolian Civilizations exhibition in May 1983, Esin was in Istanbul all through the winter of 1982. I think this time she was planning an exhibition on Süleyman. Filiz Çağman introduced many unpublished material from Topkapı Saray's various collections in the Anatolian Civilizations exhibition. I'm sure this exhibition was a big inspiration to Esin for her Süleyman exhibition. On the other hand, I cannot remember Esin coming to Istanbul before her Memlük exhibition. As far as I remember, she did not work on the Memlük material of the Topkapı collections. I think she preferred to work on the Egyptian collections for that exhibition. Esin used to share her work with Filiz after 5 p.m. They used to go to Esin's hotel room to continue to work. She did not, I used to do the library's work, as at that time there were a lot of scholars coming to the library from outside Turkey. We used to get together after 5 p.m. Sometimes we all went to the meyhane, and sometimes Esin used to invite Filiz and I, also Duygu and Reha Günay, who photographed the artworks from Turkey for the Age of Süleyman exhibition, to one of Istanbul's most luxurious hotels restaurant, where Esin also used to stay. At that time, Erol used to work and live in Bursa, and I used to work and live in Istanbul, so he could not manage to join us. I moved to Bursa in 1984, And Esin once visited us in Bursa sometime around 1994. We had dinner at home, visited Bursa monuments, and we went to Izmir together. In February 1995, I was in Europe for the College Art Association conference. During this trip, I also went to Washington, D.C. to work on some Freer manuscripts and visited Esin at the Freer. Masume and she were there too. I stayed one night at Esin's flat, but Taşkın was not in D.C. at the time. In 1998, I came to D.C. once again for another Congress meeting. And after the meeting, I stayed with Esin and Taşkın for one night and then returned to Turkey. My last visit to Esin and Taşkın was in 2001 in DC. My husband Erol and I had first had a drink at their balcony overlooking a very nice Washington view. Afterwards, we had dinner in one of the seafood restaurants. In 2003, one of our scholarly meetings took place in Isfahan, Iran. It was the arts and crafts meeting and was very well organized. Many Turkish artists were working on the traditional Turkish arts were there, and the exhibition was wonderful. It was nice to see all artists coming from various Islamic countries. It was a very colorful festival, and Esin was also very colorful as usual. Our last scholarly gathering together, hence our last seeing of each other, was at the International Congress of Turkish Arts in Budapest in 2007. I had arranged a nice photo shoot at the Museum of Budapest with scholars working on the arts of the book in Turkish arts. In this photo, you can see Ernst Grube, Eleanor Sims, Dorothea Duda, Karin Rundarts, François Desroches, Phyllis, Nurhan, me, Günsel, Serpil, and young scholars. Dear Masume, thank you very much for giving me the chance to say a few words on Esin. I'm really glad to remember her on this occasion.
Thank you, Zeynep, for that, for giving Zeren's talk and recollections. It's again wonderful to hear a personal tribute to what Esin had done, and some of the, her seriousness and her dedication to studying and do research, and her constant return to Turkey, to the various libraries to do the research that led to the groundbreaking catalogs and exhibitions that she prepared. So thank you very much, Zeren, and thank you, Zeynep. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Shreve Simpson as our last speaker, last but by no means least, another person who worked closely with Esin. So it is wonderful to welcome Shreve back to the Freer and the Sackler. Professor Shreve Simpson has published, taught, and lectured about medieval and early modern Islamic art, and especially the arts of the book in Iran. She held various Freer fellowships and research appointments, and subsequently served as curator of Islamic art and ancient Near Eastern art at the Freer. Dr. Simpson's professional career also includes administrative and curatorial positions at the National Gallery and the Walters Art Museum, as well as numerous visiting professorships throughout the United States. She's currently is a research associate at the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. Shreve, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Masume, and I want to thank you and your great Freer Sackler team for inviting me to take this walk down memory lane. It's been quite amazing. And I also want to express my deepest appreciation to Professor Lale Burke, Esin's sister, for sharing photographs of Esin and for allowing me to show some today. And finally, my thanks also to Carol Beer, Jonathan Bloom, Holly Edwards, Noha Sadek, and Linda Zeicherman, who, like me, had the privilege and pleasure of having Esin as a model and mentor, and who've also generously shared their Esin memories and experiences so that I might share them with you. So let's see, the next slide, please. As often happens in the scholarly world, where we first meet through published work, I met Esin Atıl through her 1973 catalog, Ceramics from the World of Islam. It was an essential resource while I was studying for my graduate school exams, which included a section on Arabic and Persian ceramics. And here is my dog-eared copy of that catalog. From this, I understood that Dr. Atıl was a thorough and focused scholar, able to map the varied history of Islamic ceramic production and to highlight the key stylistic, iconographic, and epigraphic features of individual pieces. This is something Julian also mentioned. And also from this catalog, I pictured her in the same mode as the very few female professors I knew at Harvard. Old, or at least middle-aged, gray, and dowdy. Next, please. So you can imagine my surprise when I arrived at the Freer Gallery for a research fellowship in the summer of 1976 and met Esin in person. It was such a revelation that it was possible to be at once a smart and productive scholar and an engaging and stylish curator. In fact, that it was possible to be a smart, productive, engaging, stylish, and female scholar and curator. That was really something to aspire to, although of course it would never ever be possible to approximate Esin in terms of grace, elegance, glamour, and style. Next, please. Speaking of style, we all know that Esin made her own beautiful clothes, and I'd always imagined that she'd had formal training in fashion design, but Lale Burke says not so. Esin just had natural flair for style and fashion, which she honed in childhood by dressing paper dolls, maybe something like these. Next, please. One of the first things that I learned about and so learned from Esin was her deep sense of responsibility for the collections in her care, which then included works of both ancient Near Eastern and Islamic art. This dedication manifests itself in careful looking at and meticulous research on the museum's existing holdings and in the judicious selection of works with which to enrich the collection. Next, please. And here are some of her acquisitions purchased with funds from the Charles Lang Freer Endowment and part of Esin's lasting legacy at the Smithsonian. And while it's no surprise that her additions included Ottoman ceramics and metalwork, she paid equal attention to medieval and early modern Persianate culture. Next, please. As we can see in these purchases. And again, next, please. And here's Esin with an illustrated Persian manuscript that she bought in 1971, so very near the start of her curatorial career. I think the photo, though, is from a little bit later. It is true, of course, that Richard Eddinghausen, Esin's predecessor as curator, expanded the collection with many more acquisitions during his 23 years than it was possible for Esin to do during her just shy of 15 at the Freer. But with all due respect to Eddinghausen, Esin's exceptional and singular contribution was to shine bright lights on the Freer holdings and to make them accessible to both scholarly and public audiences. Again, this is something that everyone's mentioned. To put it another way, Esin knew how to make the most of her collection, and she achieved this through a wonderful series of Freer exhibitions and accompanying catalogs, close to one a year. Next, please. These started small with the 2,500 years of Persian art that she did in 1971. Next, please. And quickly became more ambitious as her memorable Art of the Arab World exhibition in 1975. In the process, she created new audiences for the Freer and for the field of Islamic art as a whole. And all of this was at a museum where the director is said to have stood at the front door in an effort to discourage tourists from venturing inside. Doubtless that tale is apocryphal, but it certainly was the case that Esin broke new Smithsonian ground and had an inclusive rather than exclusive view about how to make the museum's ancient Near Eastern and Islamic collections meaningful and relevant to the general public and scholarly community alike. Esin had an innate sensitivity for objects and helped those of us who had the good fortune to come under her wing to develop our own critical skills, both in terms of looking at and evaluating works of all kinds. Next, please. Jonathan Bloom recalls that when he was researching the Freer's many hundred ceramics from medieval Raqqa in Syria for his MA thesis, that was in 1975, Esin assured him that by studying ugly examples, he would gain a better appreciation of good ones. Next, please. This same conviction was evidently behind her support of my doctoral research involving the so-called Freer small Shahnameh, that's on your left, a then little-known early copy of the Persian Book of Kings, about which another Islamic art historian said, only a mother could love. Esin knew that eventually I would be prepared to move on, which is doubtless why a few years later she encouraged my research on the Freer's fabulous Haftarah manuscript, that's on the right, and entrusted me with doing a small exhibition of the museum's 16th century Persian paintings. To overstate the case just a little bit, you might say that Esin nurtured our art historical progression from the ridiculous to the sublime. And now I'd like to make a few asides. Could I have the next, please? A few asides here in relation to that little Persian painting show, for which I remember writing the labels while Esin prepared this gallery leaflet. Esin was always attuned to opportunities to draw attention to the Freer's Islamic collection and to possibilities for what today might be called outreach. And she conceived Art of the Court of Shahtah Mosque to coincide with a major international exhibition of Safavid painting, next please, that was held from December 1979 to March 1980 at the National Gallery of Art, not far from the Freer. As many of you doubtless know, and as has been mentioned, by statute, the Freer cannot lend from its collections, and so Persian paintings from the Freer could not be on view at the National Gallery. So Esin did the next best thing and made sure that the crowds who flocked to the National Gallery show would make their way across the mall to the Freer for more beautiful Persian paintings. So the curatorial lesson here was never pass up a chance to promote your collection. Next, please. Esin's Shahtah Mosque show came on the heels of her 1978 Brush of the Masters, which was the first publication of the Freer's Persian and Indian drawings, and which also coincided with preparations for her groundbreaking Mamluk exhibition, which Doris discussed earlier, as well, next please, for a special display of the Freer's own Mamluk holdings, both to be on view during the spring and summer of 1981. In short, Esin was a model of museum multitasking long before that became a cliche. Next, please. Esin basically taught and trained by example, and that included not only how to think about objects, but also how to talk about them. Listening to Esin was always a great pleasure for young students and junior staff members who spent time with her in the Freer storage room. And next, please, for the black tie guests gathered around her display cases. She had a wonderful way of interacting with objects and with people and pointing out noteworthy details. Next, please. She was so at ease with everyone, whether Iranian royalty or the American equivalent. And this is Mrs. King, the widow of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whom Esin took around the Suleiman exhibition. And since we're in the Suleiman exhibition, as a follow-up to Zainab's wonderful presentation, may I have the next slide, please? I just want to show you some more installation shots and to share a wonderful comment from Carol Beer, who herself went on to a distinguished curatorial career. So I'm quoting Carol. What I learned most from Esin was how to bring aesthetic judgments to the meaningful display of objects to tell a cultural story. I learned that the role of the curator encompassed, next slide, please, encompassed not only selecting objects and determining how they would be displayed, but also to contextualize them for the visitor, allowing the objects to sing. Wonderful expression. Carol goes on to say, have the next slide, please. Esin taught me how design communicates and recreates an ambiance for viewers, which can contribute to their appreciation and understanding of the object. Next, please. Esin both appreciated and fostered great design in others. Thus it was that in 1980, she commissioned the Virginia-based calligrapher Muhammad Zakaria, then near the start of his remarkable career, to create an epigraphic blason for her Mamluk exhibition. This became both the frontispiece for her catalog here and the signage used throughout the Smithsonian exhibit. And next, please. And here's one of the exhibition roundels, which later hung in Esin's office and which she passed along to me when she retired. And it's now on my wall here in Philadelphia and remains a cherished memento of Esin's impact and influence. Generosity was something enjoyed by all of us whom Esin mentored. In the acknowledgments to his master's thesis that I mentioned earlier, Jonathan Bloom described Esin as generous beyond the call of duty with her knowledge, time, and concern. Likewise, Holly Edwards, who assisted Esin with the Mamluk exhibition, has called her an amazing and generous guide who coached me on 2 exhibitions on radically different topics. I think I have a slide. Next slide, please. Yes, radically different topics, the Eastern Kufic calligraphy and Severgan photographs. Esin's curatorial generosity went hand in hand with consideration for our professional development. Next, please. At some point when I was working as her research associate, Esin signed us both up for a special Smithsonian workshop in public speaking for female staff members. I'm sure that she did this specifically to help me, as she certainly didn't need tips on how to craft and deliver a presentation or how to stand at the podium or how to engage an audience. But she insisted that we take this workshop together. And so it is that still today, and thanks to Esin, I know how to begin a public lecture by touching the lower sides of the podium to lower my voice. And unfortunately, now I'm sitting down, I can't do that. And also to type my text on only the upper third of a page to avoid bending my head too low while reading down the page. So pages look like that. Esin was a model of institutional collegiality, which was one of the many keys to her success in securing loans for her 2 major international exhibitions. Next, please. Who but Esin could have persuaded the Louvre to lend its priceless Baptistère de Saint-Louis to the Mamluk show? Next, please. Or the Topkapi to send such a dazzling array of imperial kaftans and other fragile textiles to the age of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. This talent was not lost on the press. Sarah Booth Conroy, who knew a thing or two, having written over 30 years of art reviews for the Washington Post, said of the Mamluk show, only someone as persuasive and erudite as Esin Atıl could have convinced both the Egyptian and the Syrian governments and the British Museum and the Victoria and Albert to cooperate on an exhibit. Next, please. Esin also had a kind of magic touch in securing financial support for her projects, way before the Freer Gallery had anything even resembling a development office. In its review of the Art of the Arab World show in 1975, which was funded by the Mobil Oil Corporation, the New York Times paid tribute to her prowess. Quote, like so many recent important exhibitions in this country, this one by Esin Atıl is associated with the welcome social phenomenon of big business sponsorship of cultural projects. And here's Esin at the opening with some of the Mobil officials as well as the Egyptian ambassador. And you'll note too that ever fashion savvy, she favored white evening attire to contrast with the gentlemen's tuxedos and black suits. I noticed the same in one of the photos that Zainab showed from the National Gallery. It was the same. She also was wearing white. Next, please. Let me quote again from the same New York Times review of Art of the Arab World, written by its senior and very exacting critic, John Canaday. Art of the Arab World is a beautiful and important exhibition. I would like to risk a superlative and state flatly that the catalog, researched and written by Mrs. Atıl and designed by Derek Birdsall, is simply the best I have ever seen as an elucidation and recreation of an exhibition. It may be an outrageous thing to say, says Canaday, but this catalog is so good that for anyone unfamiliar with the subject, to see the catalog without seeing the exhibition is preferable to seeing the exhibition without the catalog. Next, please. As Julian discussed earlier, Derek Birdsall is an extremely talented and imaginative graphic artist based in London, whom Esin picked to create both her Art of the Arab World and Renaissance of Islam books, recognizing full well that the impact of museum publications depends in large measure on their design. Many, many years later, having agreed to publish my monograph on Sultan Ibrahim Mirza's Haftarang, to which Masme also contributed, and manuscript is also known as the Freer Jami, Yale University Press engaged Derek Birdsall as a designer. So I went over to meet with Derek in his studio without knowing much about him. And likewise, he knew nothing much about me except as some American who had written a ponderous tome on a beautiful 16th century Persian manuscript. Anyway, we're walking with him past a long bookshelf. I spied the spines of two familiar catalogs. Wow, I exclaimed, you have 2 books by Esin Atıl. Naturally, replied Derek with incredulity at my ignorance. I designed them. Of course, he forgave me the minute I explained my connection with Esin, and we got along famously after that. Next, please. So as in so many things, Esin paved the way for me with Derek, who took special care in designing the Freer Jami monograph, plus the smaller book that Masme once dubbed Jami Jr., that's the one on the left, in large part because he too had such admiration and fondness for Esin. Next, please. When in 2004, Derek published Notes on Book Design, he included both Esin's Renaissance of Islam and my Haftarang book as examples of his design approach and techniques. And you can imagine my pride at being placed in the same publication pantheon as my beloved mentor. There are many more Esin tales to relate, several involving trips abroad. Next, please. In the fall of 1976, Jonathan Bloom and Sheila Blair met up with Esin in Jordan, and together they visited the early Islamic site of Qusar Amra. And here's Esin during that visit with a road sign behind that reads something Jonathan remembers, like Baghdad, 1,500 kilometers, Mecca, 1,000 kilometers. Driving off, they had a flat tire, and everyone had to get out of the Land Rover to help change it. Jonathan remembers that he and Sheila got all hot and sweaty and dirty, but Esin remained as immaculate as ever. It was as if she sprayed herself with Teflon, Jonathan recalls. At some point in the same period, and the same trio, and next slide, please, were together again in Istanbul, and Esin invited Sheila and Jonathan for a sunset drink at a fancy rooftop bar overlooking the city. Jonathan recalls Esin saying that she always liked to get an overview of a city at the beginning of a visit. Given her lifelong familiarity with Istanbul, her invitation was doubtless so that Sheila and Jonathan could enjoy that welcoming overview. I myself don't recall drinks with Esin in Istanbul, more's a pity, but when I was making plans for my first research stay there, that was in the summer of 1977, Esin made sure that I would be safe and comfortable. Next, please. I could stay only at the Kalyan Hotel since it was convenient to the Topkapi and also had a nice restaurant where a single woman could eat on my own. Esin also advised me to get a room on the back side of the hotel, so not overlooking the Marmara because that would be too noisy, where I would have a view of some of the old wooden family homes there. Esin also briefed me on how to navigate the front entrance to the Topkapi, and most important of all, she introduced me to Filiz and Zeren, whose help was crucial for my dissertation and all subsequent research on Topkapi manuscripts. Next, please. My most memorable travel adventure with Esin occurred in February 1983, when she and I, along with scores of colleagues from literally all over the world, were invited to Kuwait for the opening of the Asaba collection at the Kuwait National Museum. And that's a museum exterior designed by Michel Ecochard, and the interior during the time of this museum opening. Well, while preparing ourselves for this visit, which was to include a black tie affair, we discussed the appropriate wardrobe. And at some point, I must have bemoaned the lack of suitable evening dress. Well, says Esin, you can take one of my kaftans. Alas, I don't have a picture of Esin in one of her original and beautiful floor-length creations, but you can imagine how thrilled I was at the prospect of wearing one. So Esin and I checked our bags in Washington and flew from there to New York, where we met up with many friends and colleagues, including Walter Denny. And from New York on to London, where our company was swelled by still more friends and colleagues. I think Julian, you must have been there too, maybe Doris also. And eventually this whole merry band landed in Kuwait. It was a jolly but very, very long trip. And then there was the inevitable airport wait for our luggage. And we waited and we waited and we waited. And in the end, Esin's suitcase never appeared. Nor did it ever arrive in Kuwait, having apparently never left Washington. Needless to say, all the women on the trip pitched in with what Walter has called serendipitous substitutes. And I tried and tried to get Esin to reclaim her kaftan, which had made its way safely in my suitcase, but she absolutely insisted that I should wear it as planned. And that was classic Esin. Unfazed by this upheaval to her travel expectations, not to mention the loss of many handmade and so unique articles of clothing, making light about what today might be called wardrobe dysfunction, and totally committed to ensuring a once in a lifetime experience for me. Next, please. Esin's consideration also extended to family. When my son Lauren was about 8 or 9, he developed a fascination with stringing beads into necklaces. Esin also made some of her own jewelry, including perhaps the strands that she's wearing in this wonderful picture. And according to her sister Lale, Esin did not care for expensive gemstones and thought design was more important than the value of stone or metal. The minute Esin heard about my son Lauren's interest, she gave him boxes and boxes of beads that she no longer needed. The necklace on the right was made with some of those beads, and it includes a little heart that you can't quite see. I don't know what Esin would have made of its design, but for me, it remains yet another cherished memento of her kind encouragement over the years. Next, please. I could go on, but we'll close here with some equally precious memorabilia, which may serve to remind us all of another distinctive Esin attribute, her signature. She always signed her full name, and with a clear, consistent, and confident flourish. That she also wrote to me with love is because everything that she did came from her warm heart and gracious spirit. Thank you all. Thank you, Tashkin. Thank you, Lale.
And thank you, Shri. I couldn't think of a better ending to this really sort of wonderful meeting. I think you brought together her scholarship, her trailblazing nature, and her warmth, and the way that Esin really inspired the next generation of art historians, and we all owe a tremendous amount to her. And I hope that this gathering really sort of showed at least a glimpse of how much we owe her and what she has done for the field in terms of, again, her publications or exhibitions, and really sort of pioneering a great many sort of aspects of Islamic art that we take for granted, that she was the first to really think about and really promote. So I would like to thank Shri, and I would like to thank all the speakers. So just to wrap up, I think I was wondering if anybody, any of the audience members had any questions. We got a few, but I was also going to ask the panelists if they had any comments for each other at this point, having heard sort of different facets of Esin's tremendous career and achievements. Was there anything new? Was there anything surprising to any of you, or was it all sort of well known?
I'll start up by saying it was fantastic to see all of these things. I saw lots of pictures I'd never seen before. I heard lots of stories I'd never heard before. I've known Esin for a half a century, and yet It was absolutely wonderful to hear all these perspectives. I want to thank all the panelists for their wonderful talks. It was really, really enlightening. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Yeah, I think that the last point that Shreve was emphasizing, which was Esin's teaching, that was something I really didn't know very much about. So that was wonderful to hear.
Yeah, we all learned a lot from her. Just being with her in the galleries was wonderful.
And I really appreciated Günsel's pictures of them at school, and
yeah,
you know, the dressing up was great. Thank you.
Special.
School days are very important, as you know, and I was a bit emotional in my talk, you know, because we've been such close friends for years, you know. It's more than half a century, Walter. We graduated in '56, so you can imagine how many years ago. And all the stories, you know, our private life, and but this was wonderful. I hope that, you know, we managed really to discuss all her contribution, of course, friendly, but also to world arts, and, you know, our different concepts that she created, you know, the identity of interactions and the different, you know, types of creativity or, you know, artistic production in all the different parts of the Islamic world. And because we use these general terms, you know, Islamic, Christian, or this and that, but I mean, what she tried to point to is we're all related, and we have, you know, all these interactions. And I think these exhibitions played a great role. I mean, we learned a lot from these exhibitions as to the creation of, you know, these other Islamic countries and cultures.
Well, I think also, Masume?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead,
Yes,
Doris.
I just wanted to say also, besides all the personal feelings and the warmth and the admiration that was shown throughout today through all these marvelous and touching communications, it was also so interesting to watch such an exciting career as that of Esin. And I think this is something one could almost present as in an introductory course for art historians, how to become an art historian, how to make a career, and how the way of all of what we have learned today and listened to today can be so useful to learn from as a model. Well, I very much appreciated, and I learned a lot from this session today. Thank you very much.
Well, no, I think so it's wonderful in that respect. And just as a footnote, I think Walter mentioned it, and the 1970s was not the easiest time for women. So there were very few, in a way, there were very few role models for Esin to become a curator. And the Freer at the time was definitely a male bastion. And so for her to be able to do what she did was remarkable. Sorry, Walter, you had something.
Well, a couple of things. One, that Esin's own mentor at one time likened working for a museum to being a night watchman in a cemetery, which was perhaps a little bit of, like many of his statements, some of a bombastic statement, but which certainly nothing could be further from the truth. Museums are where the art is, and that's where all the excitement is. I wanted to mention one thing that none of us has mentioned here that Esin did mention to me, and that is the fact that she never took the Hajj to Mecca, but she did do the Umrah, the off-season visit to Mecca and Medina, for which she had to ceremonially divorce Tashkent and undertake a marriage of convenience to a Saudi guide who then took her around to all of these places. A very, very interesting experience, and something that she did again with this incredible coolness that Shreve mentioned, Jonathan, as having mentioned that, which recalls something, perhaps it's an earthy statement, but I have to share it with you, that a very good friend of mine once said about Esin. Esin would never in her life do anything remotely vulgar, like sweat. Just wouldn't do it. She was, and in a field which is which when I started out was, as Shreve mentioned, perhaps a little bit dowdy. This same friend said that Esin had enough class for every Islamic art historian in the world, with tons left over for others.
I think also something that Oya mentioned that sort of really made me again see another great contribution of Esin was when you mentioned that she was very interested in the process of image making, and that, you know, that sort of the process part. I think to me that sort of rang this bell, because you can sort of see it in the way that she talks about objects and the way that she organized exhibitions. So again, I as a museum curator, I sort of see that as again great contribution of her approach to her work. I don't know if you want to say anything else, Oya, on that note.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what struck me. I mean, I set out to, read her article from 1972. And also, Esin didn't write too many articles, considering how many books she wrote. I was just sort of like, I'm the complete opposite, I guess. So I read her article, which was her first article, I believe, unless I'm wrong, but I guess that's her first publication. And, and it's long. It's like 30 pages. Of course, it has illustrations and all that. And it's on these two objects. And of course, there's this minute, extensive description, but it's not description for its sake at all, right? So when you read it, and when she, especially when she goes into the comparisons, she really picks up things that you could see how she was reflecting on, how objects and images relate to each other, and how they generate other objects and other images and get combined and recombined. So I think for 1972 that was quite unusual, maybe not so recognized. Probably it got published in Kunsthistoriens, and people just thought, oh, another long, descriptive article, because that's what was kind of expected. And I think it fulfilled all the expectations, but there was something different about it. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if it was recognized in its time, but I think that was kind of the Esin difference in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have one question. We've been, I think, talking about it all morning, but just to respect the question, is that if you would talk more about Esin's drive, her aesthetics, or her diplomatic abilities, especially going back to the idea that, especially in a difficult time and a difficult field. I think the Süleyman exhibition was certainly the pinnacle of her diplomatic achievements. I don't know if Günsal, Zeynep, if you want to say something, because clearly what she did in Turkey was, what a group of art historians, including Günsal, did in Turkey was quite remarkable.
Now, of course, she was excellent in social relations. Although she was living in the United States, of course, we were there for a while, and I off and on, I met her several times there. She had very good relations with also the Turkish community there. These are very significant when you're organizing an exhibition of, for example, Turkish art. Because it's really, it creates an image for a country. So, how can the diplomats, the ambassadors, and the cultural, ministry not be interested? So that's why the Süleyman exhibition, once starting this loan exhibition permit, really opened, what should I say, a new, really word for different exhibitions. And I think when I was hearing Zeynep's talk, because I never thought about that design so much, in much detail, like you were describing the Süleyman exhibition, the design and the different sections of the exhibition and all that. And that's really peak in museum design. And, that has become a branch now in all the history of art departments, And the museum studies is a track that students, choose, don't they? Oh, yeah, I mean, it's a different track now. So we never thought about it, exhibiting for us. I mean, I'm talking about my generation, was just hanging on or putting them in different on shelves and, behind glass and all that. But I mean, design of an exhibition really brings new ideas, and you can really conceive the concept of the exhibition. So I think really her contribution to museum studies is great. Don't you agree, Zeynep?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it was also something that Masme and I also discussed before. Currently we have this theory at the Smithsonian called IPOP, like thinking about ideas, people, objects, and physicality in the way that you design your experience, your exhibition experience, so that the visitors who has different learning preferences can find something to enjoy in the museum. And when you think about the Süleyman, actually, it was something that Masme first pointed out to me to say it was even IPOP before IPOP, because she thought about the immersive physical environment. She thought about the person, and she also had this big idea, and she had this amazing object. So she was actually checking all those boxes. And again, something that I wanted to highlight in the presentation was how carefully she thought about the public. I mean, she really considered herself to be the curator of the Washington, D.C. iteration, not even Chicago or Metropolitan or any other, iteration of the Süleyman, but she said, I'm the curator of the National Gallery of Art Süleyman iteration. And I thought about it just for an American audience. What do they know? What they would get interested in? So there is definitely, a lot of museum work in it, not only art historical scholarship, but definitely a huge contribution to the museum studies field as well.
Asma?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention something that struck me, Zeynep. You had mentioned it. You had written about it in your chapter on Esin and the Süleyman exhibition. Is how, I want you to say it, but this is the comment that you had, that when the director of the National Gallery, Carter Brown, called Esin. So why don't you share that story? Because I think it's a wonderful Esin story.
Oh, yeah. So it was back in 1981 when she had the Memluk exhibition at the Natural History. They could not host it at the National Gallery of Art because they just could not find the right timing. And Carter Brown, the director of the National Gallery of Art, calls Esin and says, I love this exhibition. This is amazing. Too bad that we just could not fit into our exhibition schedule. And then Esin Atıl tells him, well, I have a bigger and better one for you. And then she, brings out the idea of Süleyman. And of course, he immediately loves it. And they start talking about the Süleyman exhibition as early as 1981.
Yeah. Yes.
So again, her sort of building on what she has done before, and really making the experiences richer and bigger, and sort of drawing more audiences to the arts of the Islamic world, and especially Ottoman art in that case. I just wanted to share a comment by one of our colleagues, Jerry Bacharach. Jerry, it's wonderful to have you join. He says, I first met Esin at Michigan, where we were both graduate students. She always made time to chat with me when I was able to visit DC and help, directly and indirectly, to expand my knowledge of Islamic art. So again, a tribute to Esin as of her generosity, even as a graduate student. So, which is wonderful to have.
Masame?
Yes.
There's a wonderful chat comment you might want to read from Tom Chase, co-author of the the metalwork catalog. It's wonderful. I think everyone.
Sorry, I'm just going back and forth.
I have it up. I can read it.
Okay, why don't you read it?
So this is from Tom Chase, who was the head of the conservation the laboratory, technical laboratory at the Freer in Sackler. So Tom writes, she was wonderful. Esin was wonderful to work with. The Islamic metalwork catalog was co-authored with Esin, Paul Jett, and me, and we all read everyone's section before publication. In discussing the Freer large canteen with the nativity scene, Esin's discussion of the iconography was not totally correct. I was very worried about how she would react to some corrections, but she embraced them. Tom writes, embraced, capital letters. What a trooper and a joy to work with. I have her Mamluk catalog here and it's signed with her full name. So thanks to all of you for a wonderful symposium.
Great, thank you. There's also a comment by Martha Barry. I was in the first docent group at the Freer in 1981. Esin made a huge impact on me, not just for great knowledge, but also for her elegance, kindness, and accessibility. Amazingly, she encouraged us to stop by her office to chat if we had ever had questions about the collection, an offer that I took up several times. Looking back, what an incredible, generous thing for her to do. It really demonstrates her inclusiveness and drive to make Islamic art accessible to a general audience.
Yes, very true.
Sorry, Masame, if I add something, I was very interested, especially to see the installation shots that Zeynep showed, and to have Zeynep talk about the design at the National Gallery. Remember that these exhibitions travel to different museums. There's a natural dialectic, one which I discovered in all of my work at the Metropolitan Museum on the new galleries there, between curators and exhibition designers. I think everybody who's ever curated an exhibition knows that and it sometimes it can be quite a struggle to get two different concepts of an exhibition on the same track. And this is where Esin had a particular genius and where her diplomacy that we've been talking about really worked, because Esin had a way of working with designers, which anybody who's ever worked in a museum should observe and should have had the opportunity to observe and to have learned from. I got to know the designer for the Mamluk exhibition, Staples and Charles, the firm in Alexandria. Barbara Charles and I were actually in the same graduating class from Oberlin, but I only got to know her, as I got to know so many people, through Esin. And the fact is that Esin had a way of working with designers that designers appreciated. And that is an unusual talent, actually. And that the design histories of all of her exhibitions went incredibly smoothly. I once asked her, I said, you must have had countless fights. And she said, no, we never had any fights. And what was just mentioned, her embracing of new ideas and of her openness to other people's points of view, I thought it was quite remarkable that she went through a career of how many exhibitions in how many different venues without ever a ripple of real controversy or of personal recrimination or of any major conflict. That is a real testament to her abilities.
Having worked in a museum, I couldn't agree with you more.
It's part of the job.
And you know, she also had a terrific eye, so that certainly helped. So it was hard to argue with her. on that note. I don't know if anybody has any other comments.
Could I just follow up on that, Mas? May I?
Of course.
Because Esin always gave credit where credit is due. And it's worth noting that the National Gallery had already quite a international reputation for beautiful exhibition design before Carter Brown ever said anything to Esin about doing what ended up as the Suleiman exhibition. I do remember that Gil Ravenel, who was the head of exhibition design at the National Gallery and who was not the easiest person to get along with. And some of you know that I was actually working at the National Gallery at that time, so I tell you from experience. But Ravenel made a comment about Esin, particularly about somehow the way she pitched the exhibition to the exhibition committee, and that had in a booklet format, I think it must have been, with a scent to it that he was very distinctive, made a real impression on him. And I think one reason why he was happily worked with Esin, and why Esin was at home as the curator in residence at the National Gallery for the 3 years or so during the preparation and the duration of the exhibition. So there was a definite mutual admiration there.
And maybe I can add one more thing. The designer of the Suleiman exhibition was Mark Lighthouser, the current head of exhibition design department at the National Gallery. And when I interviewed Esin Atıl back in 2012, she also said she was working with an amazing team. The designers, especially Mark Lighthouser, was incredible. I mean, she was extremely pleased with her experience with the National Gallery, both the support of the director, every exhibition team member, but especially the design and the lighting staff. For her, they were the best in their field, and she always spoke very, very highly of them, and she really saw this as a teamwork.
Yeah, good point.
Zeynep, you were talking earlier about the immersive aspect of her exhibition. One of the attendees has reminded everybody that there was ney music playing through the speakers at the entrance, and couldn't quite remember whether it was also throughout the exhibition. So it was a very sensory exhibition with a beautiful concept as well of the 4 courtyards.
So Zeynep, was there music all through the exhibition, or was it just at the beginning?
I was too young to see it myself. I hope someone who has seen it in person can feel that information. But I'm delighted to hear about, because when we spoke about the exhibition, I don't remember Esin Atıl mentioning about the music part, and I did not come across the music. But I'm glad to hear that now there is also that sound aspect to the exhibition as well.
So again, she was way ahead of her time, because we are talking about introducing sound into our galleries now. So again, a landmark in many ways. So I know it's been a long morning or evening for many of you. So if there are no more comments, we just got a message in the chat saying thank you so much for a wonderful tribute to Esin, and I couldn't agree more. And I wanted to thank our speakers for being here and really sort of shedding light on different aspects of Esin, again, as a curator, as a person, and really highlighting her incredible contribution to the field. I love Doris's idea of having this as sort of a introduction to what it is like being a curator, but I feel it's going to be difficult to follow Esin's sort of footsteps, but we'll all do our best. At least, you know, it's important to raise the bar high so we have something to aspire to. But I do think it's important to remember what a difference she made, and how innovative she was in her approach to the subject, and how much we have learned from her and absorbed from the work that she's done. And I hope that will continue for the next generation of curators and scholars of Islamic art. So thank you all. The session, as you know, was recorded, and we will post it on our YouTube channel in a couple of weeks. So those of you who did not have a chance to see it, you can refer to it. And on that note, I wish you all a safe and pleasant weekend. And again, thank you to the speakers to be here, and thank you for our wonderful audience who have spent their Saturday morning with us. But I think it was definitely a worthwhile event to attend. So again, thank you all. Stay safe and stay warm if you're in the United States. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Good to see each other. Okay.
Yes, lovely. Thank you, Gonzalo.
Bye then.